1 minute until showtime. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Insurrection, obstruction, indictments, civilly liable for sexual abuse. The one man responsible for all that could be sitting in a prison cell on election day and still be elected commander-in-chief for these United States. That man is beholden to Putin, weakened NATO the last time around, and is currently tying himself to wealthy Saudi oil money. He enriched himself when government stayed at his properties. He campaigned on wanting to use government to go after his political rivals and wants to expand executive power. If Donald Trump is reelected, our nation is lost. So let's roll up our sleeves, get to work, and tell the MAGA folks no more before it's too late. And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's area code 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. We don't need Joel at all. We're not doing a live reaction today, so no need for the Mystery Science Theater 3000 overlay or what have you. If you want to join the conversation in chat, if you're listening on Blog Talk Radio, we don't do that chat. We have 2 other chats you can join in, either the one on liberaldanradio.com, which is the YouTube channel, or on twitch.tv/liberaldanradio. Either way will get you there. So join in on those chats. Support the show by doing various myriads of other things. There is the link to the nerdydan.com sponsorship of the game that I'm doing. Downloading the game and installing it on your computer, not your phone, but your computer, gets me $4, even if you don't play it. I think you might have to just log in and do something in it, but you don't have to play it much. That gets me $4. I've described other things that can be done in the show description on YouTube. If you want to go further with it, the link's in there as well. It's a good way to help the show out. And for the first part, doesn't cost you any money. The gameplay doesn't cost you any money. It's free to do. And if you do happen to spend money, it's if you get to the point where you can spend the $4.99, I get $25 for that, for the first 20 people that do it. So if you like playing games, it's a fun game. I've already gotten to level 11, which is the last threshold you need to do to get the rewards. I might still continue to play, but there's about a week left before it's over. When it finishes, I'll be on my cruise. So I guess as a reminder, next week there'll be no shows. Monday or Wednesday, I'm going to be on a ship. So thank you, Nick Rich, for gifting a Liberal Dan membership. Somebody is a new Danimal at this point. So huzzah. So you have that. You can gift memberships on YouTube. You can get memberships on YouTube if you're a member. If you're a member of Amazon Prime, you could also subscribe to Twitch for free. Doesn't cost you anything. Just doesn't cost you a dime, as Hal says. Otherwise, you can subscribe over there as well. You could buy me a cider. Go to the liberaldan.com, click on the buy me a cider image, and it'll get me, it'll show up in the show live. Otherwise, you can Venmo me as well. Venmo me, just don't do friends and family because you're not buying anything from me, and that'll get you even support for the show. But if you want to show off, and super chat, super sticker, bits, everything like that, all of them are available on Twitch and YouTube as well. Patreon.com as well, patreon.com/liberaldan or patreon.liberaldan.com. Shouts out to all of the current Liberal Dan Radio patrons. You got Archelius Bell, Robert Reynolds, Jolie, Aaron, Cesar, and Demonox. Those are our patrons at the moment. Feel free to join the club. I do share some things there first before other people see them, even on YouTube. Sometimes on YouTube, like being a member, you will see some things first. The second tier is supposed to be the one where you see things early, but at the moment I've been sharing it to the first tier because I try and be as nice as possible. Shouts out to everybody in chat so far. We got Nick Rich, Dakota Dave, Ichabod Deer, Jeff, Aaron, let's see, Trucker John's in the chat. Welcome back, Trucker John. Good to see you. Steve from across the pond says, hey folks, so Independence Day coming up. Guess that's out the window. You got a constitution and a king. I guess I can't say that I didn't vote for him. I can't do the Monty Python joke because I did vote for Biden, even though the Supreme Court may very well have deemed him the power of the king, even though he may not use it. Oh, look, Trucker John got the membership from Nick Rich. There you go. That's awesome. What's up, CR, Janelle, Alorasia, Jolie's in the chat. It's good to see you, Jody Fancy, Suzanne. Who have I missed? What have I missed? Jeff, dirty-minded Jeff, me and Jeff, two P's, same-minded pod. Anyway, Kimchi. Good to see you, Kimchi. Glad to see you here on the show. Like, your face looks so small in your little image thing, but, you know. More people should see the goddess Kimchi, right, Aaron? Aaron is always referring to Kimchi as the goddess, and I'm inclined to defer to my mod squad on who is a goddess and who is not, right? Let's get fancy to 50. Yes, fancy to 50. Is that fancy? Yes. We should be supporting everybody. If Fancy has a channel, we should be getting everybody's channel, getting everybody up. Let everybody get them up. All the sponsors, all the not sponsorships, subscriptions, following, do whatever you need to do to get all smaller creators up to the thresholds where they need to be successful. That's what I believe in. So, and one of the reasons I appreciate Hal, because he believes that too, and he's doing it from an even higher level. So, which I appreciate greatly, because if it wasn't for Hal, if it wasn't for, of course, all of the sparklers that have come in since Hal has been on my show, I would not be seeing the success with this so far that I'm getting, and more to come. So, bunch of stuff to talk about today, all court related, unless we somehow finish early. I doubt we'll somehow finish early, but in which case we typically will. I have a couple of more Unravelling Toxic Masculinity videos that I might want to respond to. However, I could save them till Wednesday. They're pretty good to respond to, but which means they're pretty gross. So, Jeff Curry, yes. My gutter mind will stand back and stand by. Apparently now you can say that because, you know, according to the court, you know, it is what it is. Oh, sorry, that's Trump's line. Sorry, Donald. I don't want to, you know, steal Donald Trump's anything at this point, because if he wins, then, you know, who knows who he might go after at this point. But we're going to get into that third. We'll get into that ruling third. Why? Oh, because it's the big ruling of the day. It's the ultimate ruling of the term, and it's got everybody talking. Now we should be talking about other rulings too. And I'm going to be starting off with smaller rulings. And Aaron West, Getting the dirty minds going already. Aaron West is not wearing... I'm technically wearing shorts at this point, which is good. But Aaron West is not wearing any pants. So, Kimchi, why you gotta get... It's fun to get Jeff started. So if I ever end up creating the channel and making the Liberal Dan After Dark channel, and we end up doing like that sort of stuff, it's going to be a requirement that everybody who joins the chat can't be wearing pants. So I decree. So say we all. No pants. The no pants zone. Hey Janelle, what's going up? If I haven't said hello already, hello. Anyway, so the first thing I want to talk about is gonna make Nick happy. Nope, that's not it. That's it. I'm prepared. I'm prepared. The state of Missouri sued the Biden administration again for his student loan plan, the SAVE plan. This time, two parts of it. He planned if you had undergraduate loans, it was going to reduce the amount that you would have to pay of your adjusted income or your spendable income from 10% to 5%. And it was going to treat new loans as only having to do 10 years worth of payments instead of the 20 or 25. And of course, Missouri, or Missouri, depending, I guess, where you are in the state, is bringing a lawsuit again. If you remember the last time we discussed student loans and the courts and the Supreme Court, the only way that any of the litigants who brought the suits got any sort of standing is because of Missouri. And why? Because Missouri has MOHELA. MOHELA is sort of a quasi non-governmental whatever corporation that was created to handle the processing of student loans. And they handled, even though the student loans are held by the federal government, MOHELA is one of the ones that services those loans. And I am a person who is serviced by MOHELA with my student loans. Now, MOHELA didn't actually take part in the lawsuit that we previously discussed, that threw away the ability of the Biden administration to waive $10,000 or $20,000 of student debt, depending on whether or not you had a Pell Grant or not as well. And the court, in their insanity, said that because MOHELA is this quasi sort of state-ish thing, even though if MOHELA wants to bring suits, it has the authority to do so and bring suits. And many times when the state wants to be like, hey, MOHELA's not us, the state will be like, hey, MOHELA's not us. But in this particular case, in the previous lawsuit, Missouri got standing because of MOHELA. And why did they get standing because of MOHELA? This was the subject of a previous Fat Man rant. Their argument was that if the Biden administration were able to cancel student loans, and those student loans canceled were MOHELA service loans, if those loans go away, it means MOHELA takes in less money. So therefore, they're injured. They're injured because they can't get more of your money, more of your federal tax dollars. These student loan processors were doing things like pushing people into forbearance when they didn't need to be pushed into forbearance, and other sort of shenanigans that cause people to be in their loans longer, cause their interest rates to go up. That's one of the reasons that the Biden administration had to do whatever it is that they need to do to try and help people deal with the student loan debt. It's why they're still going through and making the one-time adjustments to people's student loans, taking all that time in administrative forbearance, in COVID forbearance, taking all that time that was spent in forbearance where the interest was going up, and basically saying, hey, we're going to count that as time spent in repayment. That's the adjustment that they're doing because of the shenanigans that these services have done. So that's how Missouri got the claim, though, that they had standing. It's because they were able to say and prove to this activist conservative Supreme Court that if those loans get canceled early, Mohila takes in less funds. They're grifters. The state of Missouri is a bunch of grifters. And so now who is trying to block Biden from doing these actions and making student loan payments more affordable and doing these cancellations of debt when they meet the terms of the cancellation? It was Kansas and Missouri. And I guarantee you, if Missouri's found to have standing again, it's going to be because of Mohila and because we don't want to lose these loans, because if we lose these loans, we can't take in more federal tax dollars to Mohila. Shut up. You don't have the right to the tax dollars. You don't have the right to service the loans. If the federal government holds the loans and they want to cancel the loans, good, let them cancel loans. You're just the servicer. You should feel lucky that they chose your company, your quasi-governmental company, to service the loans so you could take in money to pay for whatever it is that you're using it to pay for. I think it's some Missouri University crap or whatever. Doesn't matter what it's for. The problem is the fact that they're trying to be grifters off of our tax dollars. And no conservatives are going to complain about this because hypocrisy is a conservative prerequisite. They're not going to care that the reason that Missouri is, getting standing here is because they want to grift off of your tax dollars. They want to keep servicing these loans for longer so they can make more money for servicing these loans from the federal government. No conservative is going to care because all they care about is, they're just sticking it to Biden. Or at least no conservative politician, I should say. Maybe there'll be some conservatives who have, integrity, who will be like, you know what, this is wrong too. And to them I say kudos. And you should stand up and kick out the other people who are being hypocrites. Because when it comes to being a conservative politician, hypocrisy is a conservative prerequisite. So what do you think? Do you think it's BS that Missouri is again bringing a lawsuit and is again probably going to get standing because of their quasi-governmental Mohila student loan servicing group? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe and keep your eye out for more Fat Man Rants. I just recorded the Fat Man Rant live on the air so I wouldn't have to re-record it later, and I did it all in one take. Normally I don't do them in one. Normally I break them up, but when I do it live, it's I think it's more neat, I guess. Happy Canada Day. Hey, Jolie, thank you for being a Danimal for 6 months. Suzanne, we should go streaking. We're going streaking! Let's go. Let's do it. The Naked Liberal Dan run. How to keep people away from me. Say I'm doing a naked run. I mean, there are some people who are chubby chasers, and because I'm large, I'm easy to chase, but still. Thank you, Fancy, for being a liberal Danimal. Thank you for joining the group, joining the Danimal. Hey, Jason, thank you for saying good job. Appreciate it. But yeah, it absolutely drives me batshit crazy that now, granted, today an appeals court did allow the Department of Education to move ahead with the plan to lower monthly payments for millions of student loans. I didn't throw that in the whatever. But the problem is that they're bringing the suit in the first place. And I'm sure that the appeals court has, put a stay on the block or whatever as it's going forward. The 10th Circuit is putting it back on track. But it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's going to be like, nope, sorry, you can't do it. Because they're a bunch of asshats. So the appeals court ruling, though, does not impact the injunction issued by the federal judge of Missouri, which prevents the education department from forgiving loan balances going forward, which is my problem. Again, Missouri does not want their loans being forgiven that Mohila services. Why? Because that means they can't be grifters off the federal freaking government. Pain in my butt. Elizabeth, Aaron and I are ready for what? A naked run? What? Is that what you're ready for? So there's that. So, and then here's the other thing. Before we get to the topic of immunity, Trump versus the United States, which seems like it should be a general thing at this point, Trump versus the United States. We have Chevron that needs to be talked about, because I feel like the court put Chevron second to last and put it on Thursday or Wednesday, whenever Chevron was dropped, because they knew a lot of other stuff was going to be going on and maybe it would get lost in the shuffle. And now with this case going on, and this case being finally having the results revealed to the public, maybe they're hoping that we'll ignore what Chevron has done, but we should absolutely not ignore what Chevron has done. So what the court said, as explained, let's see. So there's a KFF brief, the Kaiser Foundation or whatever. Let's kind of scroll down this a bit. Chevron deference is a legal framework derived from a 1984 Supreme Court case, Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council, that found that when an aspect of federal law is determined to be ambiguous as written, a federal agency issues a final regulation, typically after public notice and comment, that addresses the ambiguity, and courts should defer to this agency regulation. Only where a court thinks the regulation is not a reasonable interpretation of the law can it change or overrule it. Essentially, when a federal agency regulations are challenged in a federal court as improper interpretation of statute, the courts have deferred to the agency interpretation unless they find the interpretation is arbitrary or not consistent. In applying this deference to agency regulations, courts have two decisions to make: whether the language of the law is actually ambiguous, and if the court agreed that the language is ambiguous, whether the regulation is reasonable interpretation of the law. So that's the way it used to be. In a 6-3 decision with Chevron, Justice Roberts wrote for the majority, probably because he was like, look, these are the two big ones. I'm going to put my name on it because I don't want Alito being a freaking dumbass with this. The court concluded that Chevron deference should never have been used to begin with. Overturning the Chevron decision, the court made the following major points. Courts must use independent judgment to determine the meaning of federal statutes. It cannot defer to agency regulation just because the issue is not clear in statute. According to the majority opinion, the Chevron decision runs counter to the Administrative and Procedure Act, which incorporated prior practice that courts decide legal questions by applying their own judgment. The APA is a 46 law that sets parameters on how agencies function. Of course, if you have a new law, that should overturn the old law, right? On question of deferring to agency expertise to resolve an issue, the court said agencies have no special competence in resolving statutory ambiguities. Courts do. While courts can respect agency regulation and expertise to look to it to inform them on technical issues, Congress expects courts to handle technical statutory questions. While federal courts must generally follow prior Supreme Court decisions, bullshit. A legal concept used to be called stare decisis. Now it's called to shove it in the toilet and do whatever the hell we want to do because we're an activist conservative Supreme Court. The majority opinion said that the 1984 Chevron decision is flawed and unworkable because there can be different interpretations of what makes a statute ambiguous. As a result, the court concludes that there is not any reason to wait helplessly for Congress to correct our mistake. The opinion notes that it does not implicate prior cases that relied on Chevron to uphold agency actions, because those decisions are still subject to statutory stare decisis and can still be upheld even though deference standard has changed. In the 33-page dissent by Kagan, joined by Sotomayor and Jackson, stating that contrary to the majority, the APA includes no reference to how courts should review agency regulations, of course, with or without deference to agency decisions when courts use their authority to interpret the law. In addition, she rebukes the majority for disrupting use of the method of review, Chevron deference, that is the cornerstone of administrative law, and subverting every known principle of stare decisis with no particularly significant reason above and beyond thinking it's wrong. She questions the majority's conclusion that the decision will not implicate prior cases that have upheld agency regulations based on Chevron deference, questioning why courts would respect those prior decisions when this court is not respecting precedent in this case. She predicts that some existing federal regulations never challenged under Chevron before will now be challenged. One quote from Justice Kagan's dissent sums up her opinion. In one fell swoop, the majority today gives itself exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, involving the meaning of regulatory law. As if it does not have enough on its plate, the majority turns itself into the country's administrative czar. So here's the deal. Now, when it used to be the case that the administration would be like, look, or Congress could pass a law and be like, look, let's pass this generally, and then let the experts handle it specifically, which is how it should be. But the court's like, no, we want to be the experts, which basically is the key issue in Project 2025. In Project 2025, they want to eliminate things like that. And let's see. And they want to eliminate the administrative state pretty much, and they want to be able to do what they want to do, and they can't do it if they were able to have administrative law. So according to this one website, on June 28th, Loper Bright Enterprises et al. Versus Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce. Supreme Court negated a legal precedent called Chevron. Chevron's decision is basis for 70 Supreme Court decisions as well as 17,000 lower court decisions. According to liberationnews.org, Project 2025 is not simply a policy blueprint spearheaded by Heritage Foundation. It's billed as the playbook for the first 180 days of the new administration. Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, and trained prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. And how best do you deconstruct the administrative state? By taking away their teeth, their fangs, their claws, etc. The ability for them to actually do anything. In essence, Project 2025 is the Trump program, a program to fundamentally alter the form of capitalist government in this country by eliminating thousands of federal employees and replacing them with political appointees. The vision that this will enable them to get rid of all obstacles to maximizing profit, going back to labor laws passed in the 30s, as well as civil rights laws of 1960s, and environmental protections. There's a struggle within the elite echelons of capitalist government, those so far in actual practice as opposed to rhetoric. Those elites who don't support this extreme right-wing version have capitulated time and time again to the far right, yada, yada, yada. Regardless of whether Trump or Biden sits in the White House, the capitalist ruling class is very seems like they're very, I don't know if they're socialist or communist, but decades of progressive reforms which were adopted as results of intense period of struggle are in danger of being overturned by reactionary judges and legislators, all because these reforms and regulations infringe on the all-important right of the corporations to make their highest profit. Edited slightly by me. So, hey, Nick Rich, sorry to see you go, but at least you got to see a rant, right? Stephen Sayers, right? They want to tell us how to live. They want to tell us what to do. But they don't want experts to be able to have their say in what it is we're talking about. And like they don't trust experts, as we saw with the pandemic. They don't want experts to be able to, issue rulings of how things are supposed to be. They want the rules to be like, I guess all of them have to be enumerated in the laws now, or else the courts can be like, screw you. What? So there you go. It is what it is. Sorry, Trump. I'm not looking at my Blog Talk Radio screen right now, so you don't get to say it this time. Wonder Mom, so far so good, except wondering if I woke up in the freaking Twilight Zone. Pretty much. So let's see. But the main thing we're going to talk about today is Trump versus United States. The case of whether or not Donald Trump has immunity. Now, first and foremost, before we flip over to the alternate page, before we break up into that, let's go ahead and play the hypocrite of the week, because while I have not done a deep dive into this case, I've seen some things externally, and the first thing to remember is that Donald Trump was wrong. Donald Trump, that he said his legal theory, the legal theory of himself, of his lawyers arguing in front of the Supreme Court, said that he should have total and complete immunity for anything done, regardless of whether or not it is an official act or not. He didn't feel that he should be on liable for anything criminally that he might have done over the course of his presidency. Now, we're going to go into the ruling to see just how bad it actually is, but first things first, let's play this week's Hypocrite of the Week. This week's Hypocrite of the Week is 34-time convicted felon and GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump. Orange Foulious claimed that he should have total immunity for anything he did while president, even unofficial acts. Now that the court has ruled that he doesn't have immunity for unofficial acts, he's claiming victory. Par for the course, really. He always thinks he's won when he lost. It's why he's under indictment for January 6th in the first place. To see who next week's Hypocrite of the Week will be, tune in live Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central on LiberalDanRadio.com or twitch.tv/LiberalDanRadio for more talk from the left. That's right. And there you go. So Donald Trump was wrong in his legal theories. His legal team was wrong. Now he's claiming that he was right because he's going to try and claim, it's like, oh, they gave me presidential immunity for acts or whatever, and whatever. They're they gave a lot. I did say when I was, when we were talking about this ruling coming in and what it might look like, I did say that it was probably reasonable to expect that some immunity would be given, and that potentially you could have immunity on official acts. Like if it's a specifically official act, that potentially you would have immunity there. As long as you followed like things like international law and stuff like that. But so I didn't expect. That's one of the problems I think with a lot of the conservatives, a lot of the MAGA folks who are trying to argue in favor of Trump having immunity. They would always make the argument, well, if Trump doesn't have total immunity, he has no immunity. And I'm like, where'd you get that? That's an illogical statement. It's not either or. It's not binary. The court could very well rule. I said this many times. The court could very well rule that while Trump has some immunity, or that while presidents have some immunity, that they don't have full and total and 100% complete immunity for everything done while president. And it seems like that's what they did, except for where they drew the line is seeming to be more on the wackadoodle side than the, oh, that's reasonable side. So we shall go into. Have a good night, Suzanne. Hope things get better. Hopefully we can get the link thing worked out as well. Let's see. So let's flip over to the alternate scene. Let's put me over on the side. Put me in the corner. Nobody puts Liberal Dan in the corner. Throw the Venmo up there. Throw the Buy Me a Coffee down there. And we're all good in the hood. Supreme Court of the United States. Syllabus. Trump versus United States. Federal grand jury indicted former President Donald J. Trump on 4 counts for conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election. The indictment alleged that after losing the election, Trump conspired to overturn it by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of election results. Trump moved to dismiss the indictment based on presidential immunity, arguing that a president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions performed within the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities, and that the indictment's allegations fell within the core of his official duties. They did not. The district denied Trump's motion to dismiss, holding that the former presidents do not possess federal criminal immunity for any acts. The D.C. Circuit informed. Both D.C. and the D.C. Circuit declined to decide whether the indicted conduct involved official acts. Held. Our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power, entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, and he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. So that's where he's wrong. That's where Trump is wrong. But I don't know, presumptive for all official acts. That's where they muddy the water, and that's where it becomes problematic. This case is the first criminal prosecution in our nation's history of a former president for actions taken during his presidency. Determining whether and under what circumstances such a prosecution may proceed requires careful assessment of the scope of presidential power under the Constitution. The nature of that power requires a former president to have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office. Some is not what you gave him, though, apparently. At least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers, this immunity must be absolute. Elections are not his core constitutional powers. For his remaining official actions, he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity. Why? Why is he entitled to at least presumptive immunity? That's stupid. Stephen Sayers, how can we explain to them that our democracy must have limits? Because they don't want a democracy. We can't, because they don't want democracy. They want a kingdom. They want a monarchy. They want something that vests more power, I guess, in the executive branch than any conservative previously would have wanted. Article 2 of the Constitution vests executive power in a president of the United States of America. The president has duties of unrivaled gravity and breadth. His authority to act necessarily stems from either an act of Congress or from the Constitution itself. In the latter case, the president's authority is sometimes conclusive and preclusive. When the president exercises such authority, Congress cannot act on and courts cannot examine the president's actions. If it follows that if an act of Congress, either a specific one targeted at the president or a generally applicable one, may not criminalize the president's actions within the exclusive constitutional power, neither may the courts adjudicate a criminal prosecution that examines such presidential actions. The court thus concludes that the president is absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for conduct within his executive sphere of constitutional authority. His authority constitutionally has nothing to do with elections, though. Not all the president's official acts fall within his conclusive and preclusive authority. The reasons that justify the president's absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for acts within the scope of his exclusive constitutional authority do not extend to conduct in areas where his authority is shared with Congress. To determine the president's immunity in this context, the court looks primarily to the framers' design of the presidency within the separation of powers, presidential immunity in civil context, and criminal cases where a president resisted prosecutorial demands for documents. Framers designed the presidency to provide for a vigorous and energetic executive. Here we go. Maybe I should have had a drinking game. I wasn't expecting one, but every time they cite the Federalist. Here's an example of conservative hypocrisy right here in the ruling Trump versus the United States. Conservatives will often argue that they should be textualists, i.e. that they should base rulings off the text of the law and the law itself and not on any other things other than the text of the law, especially the text of the Constitution. Why is it then that conservatives will then bring up the Federalist Papers? If you're a textualist and you're also looking at the Federalist Papers, you're a hypocrite. They vested the president with supervisory and policy responsibilities of utmost discretion and sensitivity, appreciating the unique risks that arise when the president's energies are diverted by proceedings that might render him unduly cautious in the discharge of his official duties. The court has recognized presidential immunities and privileges rooted in the constitutional tradition of the separation of powers supported by our history. Appeal to tradition is a logical fallacy, but go on. In Fitzgerald, for instance, the court concluded that a former president is entitled to absolute immunity from damages liability for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. The court's dominant concern was to avoid diversion of the president's attention during the decision-making process. Is that a typo? I think that's a typo. I think they forgot to take out the space. Caused by needless worry to the possibility of damages stemming from any particular official decision. That still doesn't mean that should be criminal responsibility. Surrender Monkey, damn, I've been trying to sync you to techno Viking ultra-nationalist dance videos, but can't. Interesting. Yes, House and Senate are in charge of elections. Very true. By contrast, when prosecutors have sought evidence from the president, the court has consistently rejected the presidential claims of absolute immunity. During the treason trial of Vice President Aaron Burr, for instance, Chief Justice Marshall rejected President Thomas Jefferson's claims that the president could not be subjected to a subpoena. Marshall simultaneously recognized, however, the existence of a privilege to withhold certain official papers. United States versus Burr. Pardon me, are you Aaron Burr, sir? Because the privilege relates to the effective discharge of a president's powers, the court deemed it fundamental to the operation of government that inextricably rooted in the separation of powers under the Constitution. 2. Criminally prosecuting a president for official conduct undoubtedly poses far greater threat to intrusion on the authority and functions of an executive branch than simply seeking evidence in his possession. Right, for official conduct, but what's official conduct? Official conduct doesn't mean a single thing he does in office. If Donald Trump had himself Stormy Daniels in the Oval Office, would that be official conduct? No. President's golf game, does that become official conduct? No. Let's see. Where I lost my place. The danger is greater than what led the court to recognize absolute presidential immunity from civil damages, that the president would be chilled from taking the bold and unhesitating action required of an independent executive. Right, but bold and unhesitating doesn't necessarily mean illegal. Doesn't mean you can be bold and unhesitating without being illegal. Although the president might be exposed to fewer criminal prosecutions and civil damages suits, the threat of trial, judgment, and imprisonment is a far greater deterrent and plainly more likely to distort presidential decision-making than the potential of payment of civil damages. Well, maybe the president should have a little bit of fear in himself that he might go to prison if he does something stupid or bad or evil or whatever. The hesitation to execute... Basically, the court is arguing here that... the court is arguing here that if the president decided to do a Hitler, if the court decided to do a Adolf Hitler, or a president decided to do an Adolf Hitler and make concentration camps and push people into camps and murder people by the millions, would that mean because he did it officially as president, therefore he's immune from criminal prosecution? F that. No. See, Chad Bostic, I think an election example where he would be immune if he asked the DOJ to look into any possible mishandling of ballots. But still, that doesn't mean that looking into possible mishandling of ballots doesn't mean that he's then exempt from encouraging a riot or standing by and not doing anything while said riot was taking place, while said insurrection was taking place. Does him flying to his golf clubs become official? That's what I mean. I think we said that at the same time. Or I think you said it while I was saying it and then I didn't see it. Taking into account these competing considerations, the court concludes that the separation of powers principles explicated in the court's precedent necessitate at least a presumptive immunity from criminal prosecution for a president's acts while within, quote, the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. Such immunity is required to safeguard the independence and effective functioning of the executive branch and to enable the president to carry out his constitutional duties without undue caution. But there should be due caution. I mean, right? There should be due caution. Shouldn't presidents have due caution? At minimum, president must be immune from prosecution for an official act unless the government can show that applying a criminal prohibition to the act would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. I mean, so can we set up a law that says no creation of concentration camps for people to be murdered? Is that okay? Is that something that's okay to do? Maybe Biden should try that. Maybe Biden should try and pass a law, if it's not already a law, that says the creation of concentration camps to send people to their deaths is illegal in this country, and no president has the authority to do this, and then see if the Supreme Court wants to overthrow that under the terms of this new ruling that they've came up with. Oh, that's a violation of the separation of powers. The president should absolutely be able to make concentration camps because you don't want to make him have undue pressure to not make decisions. Hey, P-Dubs, thanks for joining. I understand your frustration at the topic. The first step in deciding whether a former president is entitled to immunity from a particular prosecution is to distinguish his official from unofficial actions. In this case, no court thus far has drawn that distinction in general or with respect to conduct alleged in particular. It is therefore incumbent upon the court to be mindful that it is a court of final review and not first view. Critical threshold issues on this case are how to differentiate between a president's official and unofficial actions, and how to do so with respect to the indictment's extensive and detailed allegations covering a broad range of conduct. The court offers guidance on those issues. Oh, thank you, Obi-Wan Kenobi. When the president's acts are pursuant to constitutional and statutory authority, he takes official action to perform functions of his office. Determining whether an action is covered by immunity thus begins with assessing the president's authority to take that action. But the breadth of a president's discretionary responsibilities under the Constitution and laws of the United States frequently makes it difficult to determine. Oh, it's hard. It's hard to determine. It's difficult to determine which of his innumerable functions encompassed a particular action. Why? The immunity the court has recognized, therefore, extends to the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibilities, covering his actions so long as they are not manifestly or palpably beyond his authority. Elections are manifestly and palpably beyond his authority. In dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. What? 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 Let's read that again. In dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. Anybody who's watched Legally Blonde knows in order to be convicted of a crime, you need to have mens rea or malicious will, which means we need to know your motives. Like, they're just taking all the judicial process and throwing it away. We can't determine your motives. What? Such a highly intrusive inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose. Wow. Holy crap. Nor may courts deem an action unofficial merely because it allegedly violates a generally applicable law. Otherwise, presidents would be subject to trial on every allegation that an action was unlawful, depriving immunity of its intended effect. With the above principles in mind, the court turns to the conduct alleged in this indictment. Certain allegations, such as those involving Trump's discussions with the acting attorney general, are readily categorized in light of the nature of the president's official relationship to the office held by that individual. Other allegations, such as those involving Trump's interactions with the vice president and certain private parties and his comments to the general public, present more difficult questions. So I can talk to the attorney general, acting or otherwise, about, if I'm president, about anything, and you can't ask about it because every conversation with that attorney general is now deemed official. So if I talk to the acting attorney general as president about my daily morning bowel movement, you can't ask about that. I talk to the attorney general and say, he talked to an attorney general and was like, and said the same thing that he said in the video where he talked about moving in on people like a bee and then grabbing them by the hoo-ha. That would now be inadmissible because you can't ask about the intent. It's absurd. This court has absolutely jumped the shark. You can't seek the motive? What? Stupid. I still don't understand how you can go there where Trad, because you're saying between Biden or Trump, you're going to choose Trump. Trump would take this ruling and go apeshit with it. Biden has already said that he's not going to take advantage of these newfangled powers that the Supreme Court has given the presidency. At what point does Trump have to? What point does Trump have to go? At what point does Trump have to say or do? What actions must Trump do? What things must he say? What policies must he say he's going to do in order for you to be like, you know what, Trump has done too much at this point? I mean, he'll deny Project 2025 to the point where he's put something on his website called Trump 2025. But, I mean, that just makes me think even more. He's even more wanting to implement all this Project 2025 BS. So you don't do fear-mongering. Oh, okay, you don't do fear-mongering. Well, here's the thing. Like, back in the day, I was like, oh, I'm Donald Trump, based on my experience looking at politics, could name 3 Supreme Court justices in the term when he ran against Hillary Clinton. And people were like, you're stupid, that's never going to happen. People called that fear-mongering. Was it fear-mongering? Or was it me looking at the evidence that was provided to me, looking at the ages of the people serving on the court, looking at the possibilities of what might happen, and saying, you know what, it's a reasonable assumption that the person who's in office from 2017 to 2021 is going to get to name 3 Supreme Court justices. And I was right. He did. One of which because Mitch McConnell stole the pick from Obama. And then the other one because Mitch McConnell going back on his original logic, stole that pick from Biden. Surrender Monkeys, can we at least ask if the rulings make sense when directly written in Russian or when they're adjusted by the left to right Supreme Justice? That would be a good thing to ask. I mean, I don't know. I don't think Russia, while it has a Supreme Court, I don't think it has a functioning Supreme Court. Project 25 P-Dubs is by the Heritage Foundation. So, Aaron and Jolie, if you want to, you can put a link to it in the chat, just so we can understand, just so chat can understand what's going on. In the original Circuit Court arguments, the justices said that Trump on January 6th was acting as a candidate Trump, not President Trump. Therefore, lower court already considers the act prosecutable. Sure, but then it's going to be kicked back to the courts, and if it comes back in front of the courts may say, well, even though he was a candidate, it still may very well be part of his external things because you can't include the conversations he had with his acting attorney general because that was official duties, even though it had nothing to do with his official duties. Even if he was talking about his duty, i.e. his poops, going number 2, that still would be part of his official duties. The indictment alleges as part of their conspiracy to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential elections, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to leverage the Justice Department's power and authority to convince certain states to replace their legitimate electors with Trump's fraudulent slates of electors. According to the indictment, Trump met with acting attorney general and other senior Justice Department and White House officials to discuss investigating purported election fraud and sending a letter to the departments of those states regarding such fraud. The indictment further alleges that after acting attorney general resisted Trump's request, Trump repeatedly threatened to replace him. The government does not dispute that the indictment's allegations regarding the Justice Department involves Trump's use of an official power. The allegations, in fact, plainly implicate Trump's conclusive and preclusive authority. The executive branch has exclusive authority and absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute, including with respect to allegations of election crime, and the president's management of the executive branch requires him to have unrestricted power to remove the most important of his subordinates, such as the attorney general, in their most important duties. The indictment's allegations that requested investigations were shams or proposed for even an improper purpose do not divest the president of exclusive authority over the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the Justice Department and its officials. Because the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct within his exclusive constitutional authority, Trump is absolutely immune from prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials. Okay, so, but other actions, if they weren't involving the Justice Department officials at this point, would still be potentially valid targets, but we'll see how much they decimate that as well. The indictment next alleges that Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to enlist the vice president to use his ceremonial role of the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results. In particular, the indictment alleges several conversations in which Trump pressured vice president to reject states' legitimate electoral votes or send them back to legislatures for further review. Whenever the president and vice president discuss their official responsibilities, they engage in official conduct. Presiding over the January 6th certification proceeding, at which members of Congress count electoral votes, is a constitutional and statutory duty of the vice president. The indictment's allegation that Trump attempted to pressure the vice president to take particular acts in connection with his role at the certification proceeding thus involves official conduct, and Trump is at least presumptively immune from prosecution for. Wow, they are reaching. So much reaching going on in this ruling. The question then becomes whether the presumption of immunity is rebutted under the circumstances. Is it the government's burden to rebut the presumption of immunity? The courts therefore remands to the district court to assess the first instance of whether the prosecution involving Trump's alleged attempt to influence the vice president's oversight of the certification proceeding would pose any dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. No, it wouldn't. It clearly wouldn't. Why? Because his duties have nothing to do with that act. The duties of the president have nothing to do with the duties of the vice president in this particular act. So Donald Trump saying that he wants to trying to pressure Vice President Pence into taking some action that he plainly has no authority to do is not something that is an official duty. Certain Monkey, they seem to enjoy breaking America with very little effort. Pretty much. The ruling today was done to protect everyone else in government that would have been swept up under Trump is found guilty, to save Ginny Thomas, Jamie Navarro, Jim Jordan, etc. Maybe. But I think it also protects Trump. This decision totally blew my Steve Bannon goes to prison party out of the water. Yeah, it's unfortunate. We can't be celebrating Steve Bannon finally making it to prison. 3. The indictment's remaining allegations involve Trump's interactions with persons outside the executive branch, state officials, private parties, and the general public. In particular, the indictment alleges that Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to convince certain state officials that election fraud had tainted the popular vote count of their states, and thus electoral votes for Trump's opponent needed to be changed to electoral votes for Trump. After Trump failed to convince those officials to alter the state processes, he and his co-conspirators allegedly developed and effectuated a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. On Trump's view, the alleged conduct qualifies as official because it was undertaken to ensure the integrity and proper administration of the federal election. As the government sees it, however, Trump can point to no plausible source of authority enabling the president to take such actions. Determining whose characterization may be correct and with respect to what conduct requires a fact-specific analysis of the indictment's extensive and interrelated allegations. The court accordingly remands to the district court to determine in the first instance whether Trump's conduct in this area qualifies as official or unofficial. So at least they didn't say here that those actions were officially official, and they're at least allowing the district court to say they weren't. Of course, the district court should say they weren't because they already did. The indictment also contains various allegations regarding Trump's conduct in connection with the events on January 6th itself. The alleged conduct consists of Trump's communications in the form of tweets and the public address. The president possesses extraordinary power to speak to his fellow citizens on their behalf, so most of a president's public communications are likely to fall comfortably within outer perimeters of his official responsibilities. There may, however, be contexts in which the president speaks in an unofficial capacity, perhaps as a candidate for an office or party leader. To the extent that may be the case, objective analysis of content, form, and context will necessarily inform the inquiry. Whether the communications alleged in the indictment involve official conduct may depend on the context of each. This necessarily fact-bound analysis is best performed by the district court. The court therefore remands to the district court to determine in the first instance whether the alleged conduct is official or unofficial. All right. Presidents cannot be indicted based on conduct for which they are immune from prosecution. On remand, the district court must carefully analyze the indictment's remaining allegations to determine whether or not they too involve conduct for which the president must be immune from prosecution, and the parties of the district court must ensure that sufficient allegations support the indictment's charges without such conduct. Testimony or private records of the president or his advisors probing such conduct may not be admitted as evidence at trial. So, boo. Trump asserts a far broader immunity than the limited one the court recognizes, contending that the indictment must be dismissed because of the impeachment judgment clause requires that impeachment and Senate conviction precede a president's criminal prosecution, but the text of the clause does not address whether and on what conduct a president might be prosecuted if he was never impeached and convicted. Historical evidence likewise lends little support to Trump's position. The Federalist Papers, again citing the Federalist Papers, which is hypocrisy for conservatives who are textualists to do, on which Trump relies, concern the checks available against a sitting president. They do not endorse or even consider whether the impeachment judgment clause immunizes a former president from prosecution, transforming the political process of impeachment into a necessary step in the enforcement of criminal law finds little support in the text of the Constitution or structure of nation's government, i.e., Donald Trump, you were wrong. Your legal team was wrong. The government takes similarly broad view, contending that the president enjoys no immunity from criminal prosecution for any action. On its view as applied, challenges in the course of the trial suffice to protect Article 2's interest, yada, yada, yada. Even if the president were ultimately not found liable for certain official actions, the possibility of extended proceeding alone may render him unduly cautious in the discharge of his official duties. From Fitzgerald, the Constitution does not tolerate such impediments to the effective functioning of the government. You're just making that's judicial activism right there, that the Constitution does not tolerate such impediments. Who says? I mean, you say, but y'all are activist conservative a-holes. This case poses a question of lasting significance. When may a former president be prosecuted for official acts taken during his presidency? No, that's not the question. Let's do it. This case poses a question of lasting significance. When may a former president be prosecuted for official acts taken during his presidency? That's not the question. I mean, that is a question, but another question is, what is an official act? And dealing with elections has nothing to do with the presidency. It's nothing to do. So anything Donald Trump does in relation to him getting elected has nothing to do with official acts. Yet they're trying to shoehorn it into being one. And that's why this is an extremist, activist, conservative Supreme Court. And Donald Trump named 3 of these people. It's another reason why you shouldn't be voting for Donald Trump, because we're going to get more of these horrible jurists. If we get another Donald Trump sitting in office, another Donald Trump term, and then he gets to name another 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices. Don't tell me I'm fear-mongering there, because I was right about the first 3. No, I'm not necessarily convinced that he'll name the next president in the next term will name 3, but I think 2 might be a reasonable number. In answering that question, unlike the political branches and the public at large, the court cannot afford to fixate exclusively or even primarily on present exigencies. Enduring separation of powers principles guide our decision in this case. The president enjoys no immunity for his unofficial acts, and not everything the president does is official. The president is not above the law, but under a system of separated powers, the president may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers. He is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for his official acts. That immunity applies equally to all occupants of the Oval Office. Vacated and remanded. Roberts delivered the opinion of the court, which Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh joined in full. Barrett joined except as part 3. Thomas filed a concurring opinion. Of course he did. Oh, there was a potential drinking game there. Barrett filed an opinion and concurring in part. Sotomayor filed a dissent, in which Kagan and Jackson joined. Jackson also filed a dissenting opinion. So, terrible. So I mean, I thought a lot of these first words are going to be just probably repeating what they did on a broader level. So the opinion of the court is basically they went too far to the as I said before, I figured that there would be some ruling that the president has immunity for certain actions. Like maybe if the president did an action that was specifically within the realm of the constitutional authorities of the president, that perhaps there would be some immunity there. Like the idea of, well, do you want a president second-guessing himself in a time of war? No. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that a president should get to do anything in a time of war, because certain actions taken in the name of war doesn't necessarily involve his actual duties. Like, if the president, if there was a war that was taking place or whatever, the next president was like, oh, we need to then set up concentration camps now. Oh, well, it's wartime, so we can't question the president. It's a bizarre over giving of powers to the presidency that we have to just assume that maybe he has presumption of immunity for his non-official or his non-constitutional core acts that may still be deemed official on the outer perimeter. It's just such utter and complete BS. But what do you expect from this activist conservative Supreme Court? And the fact that they can't even seek his motives? You can't determine whether or not what his motives were in doing it? Motivation is core in determining guilt. Criminal guilt requires motive. We're going to go check out some of the concurrences and the dissents. In the concurrence, I don't have a drink with me, so I won't be able to do the drinking game. I'm just going to wonder how many times Justice Thomas is going to mention himself in his concurrence. Let's see, Whisper May said, I don't think it makes sense for something another member of government wouldn't have immunity to do should be something a president should have immunity from. Example, Trump was convicted on basically the same charges as Dennis Hastert. Why wouldn't the Speaker of House have the same immunity? I think if the constitutional powers are different, then that might be why the court would make that argument, why it's different. However, I don't necessarily agree with the opinion of the court. I'm just saying that since the powers of each branch of government are different compared in the Constitution, it could potentially be a reason why the court would say that the immunities would be different as well. Just saying. Here we go. As for the dissents, they strike a tone of chilling doom. This is still in a major opinion. That is wholly disproportionate to what the court actually does today. Conclude that immunity extends to official discussions between President and his Attorney General, and then remand to lower courts to determine in the first instance whether and to what extent Trump's remaining alleged conduct is entitled to immunity. The principal dissent's starting premise that unlike speech and debate clause immunity, no constitutional text supports presidential immunity. See post at 4.6, opinion Sotomayor, is one of the court's rejected decades as unpersuasive. A specific textual basis has not been considered a prerequisite to... So here we go. Here's another part of the hypocrisy. I guess it's not total hypocrisy because Roberts did not join the ruling that overturned Roe, and since Roberts is running this, but Alito is joining in with this argument. Here we go. Again, let's reread this. The principal dissent's starting premise that, unlike the speech and debate clause immunity, no constitutional text supports presidential immunity. And citing the Fitzgerald, see also Nixon, a specific textual basis has not been considered as a prerequisite to the recognition of immunity. So it's not enumerated in the Constitution, yet it exists? How about that, Alito? It's not enumerated in the Constitution, but yet it exists. As should the right to an abortion via the 9th Amendment, but y'all hypocritically won't see it. Just saying. There's no separation of powers clause either, yet that doctrine is undoubtedly carved into the Constitution text by the 3 articles separating powers, investing the executive power solely into the president, and the court's prior decisions such as Nixon and Fitzgerald have long recognized the doctrine as mandating certain presidential privileges and immunities, even though the Constitution explains no explicit provision for immunity. Neither the dissents nor the government disavow any of these prior decisions. The principal dissent then cites the impeachment judgment clause, arguing that it clearly contemplates that a former president may be subject to criminal prosecution. That clause does not indicate whether a former president may, consistent with the separation of powers, be prosecuted for his official conduct in particular, and the assortment of historical sources the principal dissent cites are unhelpful for the same reason. Well, so is yours citing of the Federalist papers for, as a textualist. Oh, good. Adlo Him is back. That should be interesting. Let's see. I don't understand how some people think either, but that what open discussion is versus on somebody who disagrees. What? I'm trying to scroll through the chat here because there's a bunch of debate going on in the chat. To be honest, what I do know is Biden makes us look weak and feeble as a country. Trump did that with his, person, woman, man, camera, TV, and his craziness and his bending over backwards or forwards for Putin. I mean, he ceded power to Putin in the Middle East. He specifically made NATO weaker, or tried to the benefit of Putin. At least Biden has stood up against Putin and said, we're going to form a coalition to help Ukraine, our ally, who we promised that we would help if Russia got froggy. If you want to see more deaths in Ukraine, if you want to see Russia completely take over Ukraine, if you want to see a weakened NATO and Russia encroach into other areas of Ukraine, go right ahead. Vote for Trump. That's what you're going to get. Let's see. Also part of Project 2025, defanging agencies like the EPA. Supreme Court did that. Yep, that's what we talked about earlier in the podcast when we discussed Chevron briefly. We basically said the important part of Chevron is why it's harmful is because it's defanging the EPA. It's defanging, taking away the power of agencies of the administrative branch of government to be able to, for them to be able to have experts write policy on the issues that they're knowledgeable about, and now the basic courts have basically said, nope, we're now the experts. We will be able to trump you, so to speak. Jolie's son here other day, I had to show him, I had every ticket armband from every one of his shows. I said he was effing cool. The court case has to decide what an official act is. Hey, Demonox, good to see you. Yes, the Supreme Court basically says that the lower courts now have to decide what an official act is, except for they've already made that ruling on Trump's conversations with his acting AG. Even regardless of what they might be about, they basically says you can't look at this. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I don't understand how some people think either, but that's what open discussion, blah, blah, blah. In theory, checks and balances are supposed to keep those actions in line with what we want. In theory, but in practice, if you have a activist conservative Supreme Court that's going to bend over backwards or forwards for Donald Trump, allowing him to be a de facto dictator, then that's part of the problem. It's one of the main problems here, is that we don't have an independent judiciary. We have a judiciary that's beholden to Donald Trump. This ruling is not done to help Biden at all. It may grant Biden some additional powers that he's not going to use. But this ruling specifically helps Trump. It basically means that they're going to allow Trump to try and get away with as much as possible. And if he wins, he'll be emboldened to do that much more. And since you can't bring charges against a sitting president, you would then have to wait till after he leaves office, if he leaves office, to take any action. And then, now that he has a guidebook on how to avoid being prosecuted, he'll just follow what the Supreme Court, everything that he does will be done through his official channels now, and then anything he does he'll be immune from, because it's all part of his job duties. It's all part of official acts. So if he tries to coordinate the creation of concentration camps, as his advisors have said that they want to do for undocumented migrants at all, then you won't be able to go after him for creating these concentration camps. If you think concentration camps is a good idea, vote for Trump. Alarasia, I don't understand how some people think either. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not sure what Alarasia is responding to here. What you did, Chad Bostic. If you were black, a woman, member of another minority group, you would recognize the existential threat that Trump poses. Otherwise, it doesn't matter to you. I mean, maybe because I'm Jewish, that's why I'm in that number. But as a Jewish person and as somebody who has been educated on the threats such as Donald Trump, he poses an existential threat to this country. And it's just amazing to me that people don't see it. Look, I understand, and I'm willing to say this frankly and clearly, that I don't believe that Chad is part of the cult. I think if given a good enough argument, I think Chad would change his mind. Just don't know what that argument is at this point. And it baffles me that the argument has been made already. I think a good enough argument would change Chad's mind. And I think there is a number of people who are probably currently saying that they're going to vote for Trump who could be given a good enough argument that could change their minds. But there's still, unfortunately, a large chunk of Trump supporters who will never change their mind. He could say tomorrow that he wants to create concentration camps for undocumented migrants, and they would be like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." So, like how we turned the terrible decision to sacrifice American workers to somehow keep the economy going against medical advice, if protected by immunity, I argue it turning them versus us. Not sure what you're talking about there, Surrender Monkey. You're talking about during the pandemic? Is that what you're saying? Scrolled too far. Darn it. Off Twitter, if you lie in a job interview to run a cash register at a convenience store, they will throw your application in trash. What is that difference for the most important job in the nation? I don't know. But it was clearly Donald Trump lied or spoke mistruths, much more than Biden did during that previous debate. I mean, very much so, with that whole Gish Gallop thing that he basically just was throwing out lie after lie after lie after lie so that Biden couldn't handle them all. And because he was able to negotiate with and have CNN agree to not do any live fact-checking, that was to the benefit of Trump's campaign. In fact, I don't know why Biden agreed to that. Biden should have said, absolutely, do fact checking. We won't do this without fact checking. See, the French are being assaulted by Muslim activists who are colonial dissidents who are in no small part being funded by Moscow to sow dissent. What? I'm not quite sure. I mean, I know you have the French issue. I was probably going to talk about what's going on in France on Wednesday. Dude, Chad, my mind is changeable, but Biden isn't the one to do it. But would I be able to change your mind into voting for Biden? Like, if you're stuck on Trump and can't and nothing Trump does can get you off of him, then I might have to change my mind on you. But if I'm able to change your mind on Biden to not support Donald Trump, then I'll still maintain my belief that you may very well be not, part of the whole, cult. Thank you, P-Dubs. Appreciate you. Yes, okay, during the pandemic, yes. He put people at risk, opening things back up. And that was like Republican governors, too. Irresponsible governors who were more than happy to send people back into work early when they didn't need to be, while the pandemic was still raging, while we didn't have wide vaccines, and they just wanted to open back up. And look, it's not about emotion, Chad. It's about looking at history. History forgotten repeats itself. And if we allow Trump to do what he says he wants to do, if we allow people with that extremist political ideology to do what they want to do, then we're going to have history repeating itself. He literally panders to white supremacists. He is afraid to I don't know, if for some reason he doesn't believe in them or agree with them, which I don't believe he is, I don't believe, but if for some reason he doesn't agree with them, he's afraid to stand up to them, at least. But I'm not even going that far, because he has a history of saying things that are bigoted. He has a history of saying things that are racist. He has a history, and he doesn't have a history of coming back for them and saying, you know what, I was wrong on these things in the past, or showing an example of him changing his mind. Because look, I'll accept that somebody in the past held bigoted beliefs and then evolved. That's possible. That's even probable. There's examples where you see people who were like raised in bigoted families and then they grow up and outgrow the bigotry that they once believed. You had people, there are people who, somebody went into prison. I think I saw some set of videos on this guy. I forget what his guy's name is, but he went into prison and he was like an ultimate like Klansman type, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, whatever. But then after prison, he came out of prison, he got to know people, and he served time with people, and he came out of prison and he completely changed his mind on everything. Prison improved his life, apparently. So you can have people who say bigoted things, racist things, whatever, who can turn their lives around and understand that what they said was wrong. It just requires a little bit of first acknowledgement of what they said and what they did was wrong, and then actions to show that they're a changed person. Trump has done none of that for me. Jeff Curry, I'll admit I was a dumbass. I went to Bandana's barbecue before Vax came out. They spaced out the tables. I really wanted that fried catfish. I mean, we went to places, during the pandemic that were, we were vaccinated and they did social distancing. Everything was outside and we were socially distanced from other people. And we followed the rules. I mean, I went to Costco and we followed the rules at Costco. We did, so other people didn't, but there were things that, certain things needed to be done. And as things slowly opened back up, things were better. And I tried to support the businesses that I like and know and love as much as I could. But yeah, I don't think Chad and Aldo have anything to do with each other. Elasia, voting for RFK is a vote for Trump. I would typically argue that, although in Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania in 2016, had the people that voted for Bernie and then flipped from Bernie and voted for Trump, had they instead just simply voted for Jill Stein in those 3 states, Hillary would have won. So, but in generally speaking, yes, if you're not voting against Trump in the most effective way, against the only candidate who has a chance of beating him, which is Biden, in states that matter, you're basically just helping Trump win. I mean, somebody who's a Trump voter moving away and voting for RFK Jr. could potentially be a good thing, but it's better if they vote Biden. So, Eggoff Twiddler, would arresting and imprisoning a Supreme Court justice for over $5 million in an unregistered gifts, bribes, whatever, be considered an official act? Well, here's the thing. Biden doesn't have that sort of communication with his AG. Biden feels like the Attorney General's office should be independent and should be able to do and enforce the law and go after people for, because they're criminals, not because there's a political vendetta. But if Joseph Biden did have a conversation with Merrick Garland and he said, look, why don't you look into arresting, Thomas for his bribes and all his shenanigans that he's done that could be seen as in violation of the law. Or maybe look into it and try and get a lawsuit, arrest him for it and see what's going on. Now, if Joseph Biden had that discussion with the Attorney General, that discussion would be inadmissible in court. So he can have those discussions every day he wants and twice on Sunday. He can spitball with his AG all he wants. He can have all sorts of strategy sessions of how Biden can have all sorts of strategy sessions. How do I want to use government to go after my political opponents? AG, come here. Let's have this conversation. You, Secretary of Commerce, how am I going to get you to go out? He could talk to everybody in his official capacity as president, to his advisors in their official capacities as heads of the departments or whatever, and none of that information, according to this ruling, can be now subpoenaed and used against him in a court of law, regardless of how horrible it might be. Up to and including hey, do you think we can get SEAL Team 6 in on this? Demonox plays. Demonox, yes, thank you. First of all, thank you. First Patreon, original Patreon of Liberal Dane Radio. The first patron. Yes, every vote should count. It should, but it won't unless we eliminate the Electoral College. So, and the problem with the 270 compact is not every state completes, I think, counting of the votes, unless if it's shown that a certain person is hypothetically mathematically eliminated or whatever. So you'd have to trust that the votes from all the other states are correct with a Project 270 compact deal. You'd have to trust that you'd have to trust the popular vote counts in order for that to take place, or you need an amendment to the Constitution, which is going to be difficult if not impossible to pass, because you'd have to get the small states to give up their powers, and they're not going to, even though it's the right thing to do. But yes, I mentioned states that matter because, honestly, if somebody is mad at Biden in Louisiana and is not going to vote for Biden in Louisiana is 2/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat. I don't give a rat's ass how people vote in Louisiana. There's no way Biden's getting Louisiana. None. And until I see numbers that show otherwise, I am not going to be worried about people in Louisiana who are mad at Biden and who don't want to, and who aren't going to vote for him and who might vote third party, who might stay home and not vote, etc. I don't care about that. Conversely, people in Massachusetts, Massachusetts is going to vote for Biden. And I don't think there's anything that can be done that will stop Massachusetts from voting for Biden. So if people in Massachusetts are mad at Biden and are going to vote third party or not vote at all, Biden's still likely going to win Massachusetts, so it really doesn't matter at that point. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, those states, yeah, they matter. Unfortunately, they matter more than all the other ones because of the way we have this system, this shitty system that we've set up. So, thank you, Chad, for the $10 super chat. Appreciate you. I'm going to heart you for that one. Appreciate you. Hey, Carrie C, good to see you. Thank you for joining the chat. Biden should ask the Supreme Court if it supports SEAL Team 6 taking out certain Supreme Court justices. See, Surrender Monkey, I'll be honest, there is no level of corruption in the manga devotees will not put up with, even if it costs them their dignity itself. It'll be hard. It's hard to be lied to. It's harder to accept you were fooled. See, Biden barely won Massachusetts. Is that correct? Let's look. 2020 presidential election result, Massachusetts. 2020's United States presidential election in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts. Let's flip this back over here. Joe Biden got 65% of the vote compared to Donald Trump's 32% of the vote. So he won by 1.215 million votes. So no, I have to fact check you there, Deminox. Joe Biden did not barely win Massachusetts. Joe Biden handily won Massachusetts in 2020. Just saying. Yeah, 65%, and not just 65%, but 2.38 to 1.16. So that's 2.22 or 2.215. Yeah, so 65 versus 32, that's a whole 33 percentage points more. He won it by 33 points. That's an easy win. I don't think Massachusetts is going for Trump. Honestly, I don't. Massachusetts might occasionally like to throw in a Republican governor or senator because they like to be silly. But it's Biden won it hands down. I mean, Biden won Massachusetts in the primary hands down without even trying. I mean, I know you don't like that, but he did. I mean, Sanders and Warren also got votes, but he got the most delegates. He got 33% of the primary vote compared to Sanders' 26%, 26.5, then Warren's 21.4. So, anyway, let's go back to the ruling because I do want to get to some of the other stuffs that some of the other folks talk about. So, Trucker John, elections have consequences. We've seen these recent horrendous SCOTUS decisions. Well, yeah, not just in the SCOTUS decisions, though. We've seen it in these other decisions that have been done at lower courts as well. We've seen it in all of the documents cases that have Donald Trump got to name this one person, and there was a 1 out of 9 shot that this Judge Aileen Cannon, would get both the initial hearing and the regular hearing because there were 3 judges. And the odds of her getting it, the first job was 1 out of 3. Odds of her getting the second one, 1 out of 3. 1 out of 3 times 1 out of 3, 1 out of 9. The odds of her getting both are 1 out of 9. Trump got lucky to get one of his cronies over that trial. And that trial, with the exception maybe of him bringing the documents to, which is one thing, but once he was no longer president, his actions with the documents were absolutely and 100% not an official act. But yet we're probably not going to see anything pertaining to it before the election, which means if Donald Trump is going to be convicted of violating the law that he signed, then he needs to lose this election. Hey, 5 Eggs, what's going on? Hold on the calling yet, because we're still kind of going over this, and we'll give the number to call in a second. So we'll handle calls after we finish going over the case. Whatchamacallit. But here's the thing. If you think that voting for Trump, another thing, voting for Trump means you think that you want to have somebody in office that's so stupid. I mean, how stupid can you be? We've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't keep saying it. He didn't like the law as it stood when it came to mishandling of confidential documents, classified documents, secret, top secret documents. He didn't like it because it was only a misdemeanor. So they made it a felony. Congress passed the bill, made it a felony. He signs it into law. Now it's a felony, punishable 5 years of prison for violating the law. What does he do? Violates the law. How stupid do you have to be to violate the law you just signed into law yourself? Demonox Judge Kennan is a true, pure, and balanced, impartial judge who's fair and wonderful and not corrupt, and I hate anchovy pizza and all of their blatant lies. Yes, Heritage Foundation picked 3 SCOTUS justices. Heritage Foundation Road 2025. It's not a coincidence. And that's true. It's not a coincidence. I mean, the Heritage Foundation is often writing, supporting here are the people that we would like to see you pick. But I mean, even then, it was kind of obvious. Back in the day, there was a paper that determined whether or not Roe would be overturned. I think back in like 2012, and that paper in 2012, that article said included Kavanaugh as of somebody potentially on the Supreme Court that would overturn Roe, even though he was nowhere near getting nominated at that point. It might have even been an earlier paper. I don't even remember, but it was like extremely crazy that they predicted Kavanaugh. I was talking about Amy Coney Barrett back in 2016. I was like, do you want to see Amy Coney Barrett on the court? Because we're going to get Amy Coney Barrett on this court if Donald Trump gets elected president. People call me stupid. People call me crazy. People question my intelligence, yada, yada, yada. What does that get me? Well, it might get me a few bucks if you also donate to the patron or Venmo me or buy me a cider. I wonder if Clarence Thomas is nervous that an immigrant will be taking his, quote, black job. Yeah, I don't understand what black jobs are. That's another thing that we have yet to determine. What is a black job versus a Latino job or his Mexican job or whatever it is Donald Trump said? As we scroll by, it is so ordered. All right, here we go. Let's Justice Thomas concurring. We're going to pretend that I have an alcoholic beverage, even though I don't. We're going to see how drunk I might have been reading Justice Scalia's concurrence, how many times he cites his own self in this concurrence, regardless of if it's him concurring, him with a ruling, or him with dissent, him reviewing his own dissent. See what kimchi, the abortion for life of the mother, wasn't voted on by last week by party lines. We talked about the ruling for the abortion ruling last week as well. I did say that I wasn't taking calls yet, but I guess fine. I'll take you 5 eggs. I did say I was going to go through the ruling, but we'll take you. How's it going? How are you? How's your night going? Other than the fact that we have a dumbass Supreme Court. Right. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. You can't hear. Okay. You're now. Start again. You said it's all about the presidency and not the president.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Dude, it's not. What do you want? Fucking Stephen Miller? Do you want Stephen Miller?
No.
In your life?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. We all know this. But a lot of people are like, oh, Biden's not cognitive. What? Why do you have to take 2 tests? Really? You know?
I mean, look, I've said it before. I don't think that Biden has cognitive problems. I think he has a stutter, and I think stutterers have bad days.
Yeah,
and I
we
already have
all
a
know
video
that.
on that.
Yeah.
But like my
Yeah,
thing
we
is
know.
just that, you know, if Biden was like an invalid in a wheelchair,
Go
with
ahead.
with like diarrhea coming out of his pants and being fed strained peas by Jill Biden, he'd still be a better choice than Donald Trump.
Correct. We know this.
Yes.
We watch you. Love you. Bye.
Appreciate you. Have a good one. Bye. Anyway, make sure to give a link to their show as well, please, mods, because I don't have it readily available to me, but make sure to put the link up there to their show, because their show is good as well, and we need to support all of our fellow shows. Chad Bostic, I don't know what black jobs are. Well, here's the thing. Black jobs are what Donald Trump said. What you have to ask him what a black job is. He's the one that says that the immigrants are coming in to take black jobs and Hispanic jobs. Then he actually then said union jobs too, but he might have been fine if he would have just said the immigrants are coming to take away union jobs. Then he's just being xenophobic. But he's being not just xenophobic, he's now being racist and additionally xenophobic because, well, what is a black job? Debonax, I hate Biden, and even I say he doesn't have cognitive problems. He's just old and slow, can't keep up for a high-pressure job. I hate the conspiracy crap. I also hate Trump even more. And I agree. I mean, I clearly, Trump hate is almost universal here. But all right, let's go back to that. That's not the one I want. That's the one I want. As someone with people with dementia in their family, it's just insulting with people that peddle that crap, and it's ableist. It's also ableist to try and claim that someone with a stutter has dementia, because a stutter is a legitimate condition, and people with stutters can have bad days. So it would have been nice if Tapper would have asked Trump what black jobs were, but then again, the agreement that was made, as I understand it, for the first debate, or maybe for both debates, is that there would be no fact-checking. So the moderators were not going to kind of ask them about their questions. They could re-ask the asked questions, but I don't think they could respond to them and have them I don't think they could ask for a clarification. I think they could just re-ask questions if those questions remained unanswered. So thank you, Jolie, for putting the link up. Appreciate you. Hey, Diane, good to see you. Yeah, Donald Trump took a black job. Let's go back to this. Justice Thomas concurring. Few things would threaten our constitutional order more than criminally prosecuting a former president for his official acts. But this is not an official act. But y'all gonna shoehorn it and make it think it is. Fortunately, the Constitution does not permit us to chart such a dangerous course. Yada yada yada. Okay, he cites Scalia. Of course he's in a dissent. While the separation of powers may prevent us from righting every wrong, it does so in order to ensure that we do not lose liberty. Scalia dissenting. He loves to cite dissents. It's crazy. I write separately, of course, to highlight another way in which this prosecution may violate our constitutional structure. Of course you do, because you love your pet projects and love to see yourself speak or type. In this case, the Attorney General purported to appoint a private citizen as special counsel to prosecute a former president on behalf of the United States, but I am not for sure that any office for the special counsels has been established by law, as the Constitution requires. By requiring that Congress create federal offices by law, the Constitution imposes an important check against the president. What check? You're eliminating checks against the president. He cannot create offices at his pleasure. If there is no law establishing the offices that the special counsel occupies, then he cannot proceed with his prosecution. A private citizen cannot criminally prosecute anyone, let alone a former president. No former president has faced criminal prosecution for acts for the 200 years since the founding of this country, and no former president has been Donald Trump either, until Donald Trump. And so this is despite numerous past presidents taking actions that many would argue can constitute crimes. If this unprecedented prosecution is to proceed, it must be conducted by someone duly authorized to do so by the American people. The lower courts should thus answer these essential questions concerning the special counsel's appointment before proceeding. Of course, they must not, because your concurrence is not a judicial precedent at this point. It's just you blathering on like another idiot. The fight has now moved to the word official, like the word, the word is like, not like the word shall, or like is. What's the meaning of is, if you want to go back to the Clinton thing? President shall nominate, set forth by advice of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors. The constitutional process for filling an office is plain, blah, 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 blah. To appoint inferior officers without advice and consent of the Senate, blah, 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 blah. Oh, he cited himself. Look at that. There we go. He cited his own concurring opinion as relevant here. So, but he's citing his concurring opinion. He's not citing the actual precedent. So therefore, him citing his concurring opinion means nothing. Before the president or department head can appoint any officer, the Constitution requires the underlying office be established by law. The Constitution creates some offices, but the office that's created is the office of the Department of Justice. So you're hiring a special counsel to work as a representative of the Department of Justice. What? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Of course, and established by law, blah, 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 Congress creates by statute. Thomas concurring, again, citing himself. If we were drinking, we would take a drink. Limitation on president's power to create offices grew out of the founders' experience with the English monarchy. Blah, 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 blah. The ability to create offices raised so many concerns about the king's ability to amass too much power. Of course, he's citing other books that have nothing to do with the Constitution. Blah, 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 blah. Again, if you're a textualist, why are you citing anything but the Constitution? You're a hypocrite, that's why. Oh, he cited Kagan. Wow, that's crazy. What was it? The Constitution thus gives Congress broad authority to establish and organize the executive branch. Kagan, concurring in judgment in part and dissenting in part, by keeping the ability to create offices out of the president's hand, the founders ensured that no president could unilaterally create an army of officer positions that he could fill with his supporters. Instead, our Constitution leaves it to the hands of the people. Long-standing practice from the founding to today comports with his original understanding. The first Congress routinely and explicitly created offices by statute, blah, 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 blah. In the past, Congress at the time has expressly created offices similar to the position now occupied by the special counsel. Congress created an office for a special counsel to investigate the Teapot Dome scandal, and a statute provided for the appointment of an independent counsel that we addressed in Morrison v. Olson. We cannot ignore the importance that the Constitution places on who creates a federal office. But he's not creating a federal office. He's just appointing, or somebody's being hired to do this work. It's difficult to see how the special counsel has an office established by law as required by the Constitution. Blah, blah, blah. Of course it is, because you're crazy. Let's just scan down. Oh, there we go. Opinion of Justice Thomas. At least he's citing himself in an actual opinion and not in a concurrence. We would take another drink. Was that 3 or 4 at this point? I think it's 4. Even if the special counsel has a valid office, questions remain as to whether Attorney General filled that office in compliance with the Appointments Clause. For example, it must be determined whether the special counsel is a principal or inferior officer. If the former, his appointment is invalid because the special counsel was not nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. What? He would just be an employee. Whether the special counsel's office was established by law is not a trifling technicality. If Congress has not reached the consensus that a particular office should exist, the executive lacks the power to unilaterally create it. Of course, you think, oh, it's Scalia this time, not him. Let's scroll. Yeah, so that was pretty much his just blathering on about his opinion. But his opinion doesn't mean anything at this point. His just concurrence to what everything else that was written is the only thing that matters. So, see, Chad Bostic, actually, there's one way Biden can get my vote. If he pardoned Hunter and Trump both and said he wanted to take politics out of the law, that would probably win Biden the election. See, I'll agree. I think the fact that he's not pardoning Hunter is showing that he's not abusing his own powers. Now, of course, Biden couldn't pardon Trump for the New York crimes for which he's already been committed or convicted of. But yeah, Chaz, it depends what the meaning word is, as I said. There are many on the Chucker John. There are many on the right that point to the left being extreme when the reality is most liberal policies are in the mainstream. Tim Farrell, the Biden administration is effective, efficient, organized, and professional. A Trump administration would be racist, Nazi, QAnon, entitled oligarchs. To tell me again about Biden's stutter. Exactly the point. And a lot of people are critical that Biden will. I have somebody on my friends list on Facebook who is critical of the fact that Biden listens to advisors. Like, that's the point. You have advisors to listen to them. You as president are not going to be the end-all and be-all of all knowledge of everything there is to know under the face of the earth. So therefore, you bring in experts. Now, if you're Trump, you do silly things, like you bring in somebody who is in charge of, who is a brilliant neurosurgeon, and you put him in charge of housing. And then the reason, he lived in a house once, and still does. What? You put somebody who was in charge of, was it Amway, maybe? And also, I think DeVos did Amway. And also somebody who is in charge of processing student loans, and you put them in charge of Department of Education. Somebody who has no background in actually educating people. Because that makes sense. That's what the Trump administration looks like. Putting wrong people in the wrong positions because ultimately he wants to be the person that sits up there and argues as to whether, and discusses whether or not people should be injecting disinfectant into their systems, or if we can put light into the bodies to somehow kill COVID. Like, if I had a brilliant outside the box idea that said, hey, what if could we in some way disinfect people's bodies like we do on surfaces of things? I'd go talk to my advisors first and be like, am I stupid here? And they tell me, yes, you're being stupid here. And I'd be like, okay, I won't bring it up then. So Chad, what's funny is some of you in chat respond with such hate to me, but as a Trump voter, I never call names or am hateful to you. I appreciate the fact that you're not hateful to the other people. I think people are afraid and scared of what Trump will do because we saw what Trump did do, and it's terrifying. Like, my issue and my concern is, how can you look at the things Trump did? Like when Trump in Tulsa, ignoring the fact that he killed Herman Cain with his irresponsible behavior. In Tulsa, Trump was like, I told them to stop testing because when you have testing, you have more cases. Like, that's the type of person. He doesn't want people to know the actual number of cases there were because he felt that if people knew how many actual COVID cases there were, they would look at him as a failure as a president. I mean, we still do over here in Liberal Dan Radio, talk from the left, that's right. But he was afraid that more people would look at him as a failure because if people saw the real numbers, they would know just how bad he was. So his answer to that was not to solve COVID, but to stop testing. Because if you have more testing, you have more cases. No. If you have more testing, you reveal more cases, those people still have the disease. And I'll say this report, I'll say this a million times in the future, I'm sure, had Donald Trump simply done the correct testing and done widespread testing to see how many people were actually getting infected with the virus, we could have probably done things like targeted lockdowns and not a mass countrywide lockdown. We probably could have known how many people had it that were asymptomatic and maybe have seen a lower death rate from the whole thing. Maybe thus easing our minds a little bit more. And we would have had a better understanding as how to control it. But no, Donald Trump wanted less testing. And he admitted to downplaying the threat of the virus to Woodward because he wanted to sugarcoat things so much so that we all got diabetes. Well, maybe except for me, because I can't get my sugar high enough to get medicine that I want. But that's a different story. So how can you support the guy who put so many people's lives at risk because he didn't want to test? He lied about how threatening the virus was, and his own son-in-law was willing to be like, well, let's let all the people in the black cities get it. If you're in a city that has a large black population, they'll be more susceptible to it because of the socioeconomic factors of being a poor black person living in an inner city. You'll be more likely to get it, and then therefore we may be more likely to win elections because we're going to, they're going to get us sick and they're going to die more quickly, so therefore we'll be safer in the red areas. And as it turns out, and that's probably why Trump didn't actually implement any sort of vaccination distribution system, because when Biden came into office, there was no vaccination distribution system. So Biden had to create one, and instead of getting like 100 million shots into arms, he got 200 million shots into arms. So he doubled his total that he wanted to do. And then once we started getting vaccines in arms, we started seeing the death rates drop in the blue areas, and we started seeing the death rates go up in the red areas. And then you started seeing for every 5 deaths in a red area, you had 1 death in a blue area. So the red areas were dying faster than the blue areas. So ignoring anything else that Trump did, how could that not be seen as utter failure when it came to the response of COVID? Trump was responsible. His inaction, his irresponsibility, and his unwillingness to actually look at the numbers truthfully caused hundreds of thousands more Americans to die than needed to die. Now, should he be able to be prosecuted for that? Because his failures in his administration in the public response to COVID caused people to die? That may very well be what's considered to be an official act and therefore not prosecutable. And am I going to argue with that part? I don't know. What I will argue with is the fact that Donald Trump has no authority over elections, and therefore he should have no authority over this. And this should never be considered to be part of his executive duties. Josh was putting a light and body before or after Tucker's ball tanning. Why not both? Maybe he heard about the ball tanning and was like, ooh, I should get my balls tanned too. Maybe they'll look better. Trump has a real body count. Yes, he does. Trying to see what. See, Trump has been a crook his entire life. He has stiffed most of his contractors and sued the rest. You are cool with a felon and a crook. I have zero respect for you, not even fronting. And that's another thing. I mean, if you want to look at Trump, that information was known back in 2016, that Donald Trump stiffed contractors constantly, that he would do things like agree to pay somebody X, and then once the work was done, he'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to only pay you Y, where Y was less than X. And then they were like, well, you agreed to pay X. And he's like, well, sue me. And the cost of it, getting an attorney and suing him over the difference between X and Y would be more than the difference between X and Y. So they'd be losing more money because they'd have to, even if they won, they'd still lose. And Trump knew this. So he used that system to his advantage to take advantage of people. And then once it got to a point where the business was no longer useful to him, he would cash out and he would declare the business bankrupt. Which I'm going to say, well, and that would avoid him from getting out of paying even more debts. So a lot of times people say, like, oh, he bankrupted businesses, like, and therefore he's a bad businessman. Well, he's an evil businessman. But I think he knew what he was doing. I think he or somebody, one of his advisors, knew what they were doing, in that they were using the bankruptcy laws to their advantage to try and have to pay as few debts as possible while cashing out as much money from the business as possible. That's what Donald Trump is. That's what Donald Trump brings to government. Do we really want that in government? The only contractor that ever got paid by Trump was Stormy Daniels. I guess technically didn't whatchamacallit get paid as well? Michael, what's his face? The one who hates him now. All right, let's see. Justice Barris, concurring in part. For reasons I explained below, I do not join in part 3C of the court's opinion. The remainder of the opinion is consistent with my view that the Constitution prohibits Congress from criminalizing a president's exercise of core Article 2 powers and closely related conduct. That said, I would have framed the underlying legal issues differently. The court describes the president's constitutional protection from certain prosecutions as an immunity. As I see it, that term is shorthand for two propositions. The president can challenge the constitutionality of a criminal statute as applied to official acts alleged in the indictment, and he can obtain interlocutory review of the tribal court's ruling. There appears to be substantial agreement on the first point. Like the court, the dissenting justices and the special counsel all accept that some prosecutions of a president's official conduct may be unconstitutional. See Sotomayor. For interlocutory review, our precedent recognizes that resolving certain legal issues before trial is necessary to safeguard important constitutional interests. Here, executive branch independence on matters that Article 2 signs to the president's discretion. Properly conceived, the president's constitutional protection from prosecution is narrow. The court leaves open the possibility that the Constitution forbids prosecuting the president for any official conduct, instructing the lower courts to address that question in the first instance. I would have answered it now. Though I agree that a president cannot be held criminally liable for conduct within his conclusive and preclusive authority and closely related acts, the Constitution does not vest every exercise of executive power in the president's sole discretion. Congress has concurrent authority over many government functions, and it may sometimes use that authority to regulate the president's official conduct, including by criminal statute. Article 2 poses no barrier to prosecutions. I would thus assess the validity of criminal charges predicated on most official acts, i.e. those falling outside the president's core power, in two steps. The first question is whether the relevant criminal statute reaches the president's official conduct. Not every broadly worded statute does. For example, 956 covers conspiracy to murder in a foreign country and does not expressly exclude the president's decision to, say, order a hostage rescue mission abroad. The underlying murder statute, however, covers only unlawful killings. The Office of Legal Counsel has interpreted that phrase to reflect a public authority exception for official acts involving the military and law enforcement. But if the Office of Legal Counsel has interpreted that phrase to mean a certain thing, but if you think that it's vague, then Chevron just nuked that, didn't it? Side effects of stupid rulings create other stupid things. So I express no view about the merits of that interpretation, but it shows that the threshold question of statutory interpretation is a non-trivial step. If the statute covers the alleged official conduct, the prosecution may proceed only if applying it in the circumstances that poses no danger of intrusion to the authority. On remand, the lower courts will have to apply that standard to various allegations involving the president's official conduct. Some of those allegations raise unsettled questions about the scope of Article 2 power, but others do not. For example, the indictment alleges the president asked Arizona House Speaker to call the legislature into session to hold a hearing about election fraud claims. The president has no authority over state legislatures or their leadership, so it is hard to see how prosecuting him for crimes committed when dealing with the Arizona House Speaker would unconstitutionally intrude on executive power. At least she makes some sense. more sense than the rest of the idiots on the conservative bloc, which is shocking because I was not expecting that at all. Granted, she's still agreeing with the most of the opinions, so she still sucks, but she sucks, I guess, less than the other ones. This two-step analysis, considering first whether the statute applies and whether its application to the particular facts is constitutional, is similar to the approach that the special counsel presses in this court, brief for U.S. 24 to 30. It also is a usual approach to consider the validity of statutes in situations raising a constitutional question. An important difference in this context is the president is entitled to an interlocutory appeal of the trial court's ruling. A criminal defendant in federal court normally must wait till after trial to seek review of the court's refusal to dismiss charges, but where the trial itself threatens certain constitutional interests, we have treated the trial court's resolution on the issue as a final decision for purposes of appellate jurisdiction. President, blah, blah, blah. Circumstances fall squarely within our president authorizing interlocutory review. When a president moves to dismiss an indictment on Article 2 grounds, he makes no challenge whatsoever to the merits of the charges against him. He instead contests whether the Constitution allows Congress to criminalize the alleged conduct, a question that is collateral to and separable from his guilt or innocence. Moreover, the president's executive branch authority would significantly be undermined if appellate review of a constitutional challenge were postponed until after conviction and sentence. The prospect of a trial court erroneously allowing the prosecution to proceed poses a unique danger. I can agree with that, in that it's reasonable for them to determine whether or not the president can be tried with the charge before allowing the charge to continue, because if you allow the former president to be tried and convicted, but then afterwards say, well, but you couldn't because of these things, then you then create a real messy situation. So I think it's reasonable to suggest that regardless of whether or not but maybe that's something that should be true for all cases, whether or not to be able to deem that the rule is valid or true before allowing any cases to continue, especially if it's novel, if it's a novel argument. If it's not a novel argument, then not, but this is a novel argument, so I can see that point that she makes. Not that I agree with the rest of it, but I see that point. I understand that most of the court's opinion to be consistent with these views. I do not join Part 3C, however, which hold the Constitution limits the introduction of protected conduct as evidence in a criminal prosecution of a president beyond the limits afforded by executive privilege. I disagree with that holding. On this score, I agree with the dissent. The Constitution does not require blinding juries to the circumstances surrounding conduct for which presidents can be held liable. Consider a bribery prosecution a charge not at issue here, but one that provides a useful example. The federal bribery statute forbids any public official to seek or accept a thing of value for or because of any official act. The Constitution, of course, does not authorize a president to seek or accept bribes, so the government may prosecute him if he does so. See Article 2. See also memoriam from Silberman, blah, 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 blah. To make sense of charges alleging quid pro quo, the jury must be allowed to hear about both quid and the quo, even if the quo, standing alone, could not be a basis for the president's criminal liability. I appreciate the court's concern that allowing into evidence official acts for which the president cannot be held criminally liable may prejudice the jury, but the rules of evidence are equipped to handle that concern on a case-by-case basis. So again, Barrett, while still concurring with the dumb argument, the dumb ruling, still seems to make a little bit more sense than her conservative counterparts on the bench. Constitution does not insulate presidents from criminal liability for official acts, but any statute regulating the exercise of executive power is subject to constitutional challenge. A criminal statute is no exception. Thus, a president facing prosecution may challenge the constitutionality of a criminal statute as applied to official acts alleged in the indictment. If that challenge fails, however, he must stand trial. That part's reasonable. Who would have thought that of the six conservatives on this ruling, that Barrett would be the most reasonable of the six? Still not agreeing with her on the other parts, but Barrett was the most reasonable of the six, something I thought I'd never say. See, Sotomayor. Today's decision to grant former presidents a criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. So, see, like, instead of with respect, like, you normally start, like, with respect. Like, this is almost like it's almost like I feel like she wanted to start, like, at the scene in Hamilton when I think it's the second cabinet rap battle that they do, and Alexander Hamilton is like, "You must be out of your goddamn mind." Today's decision to grant president's criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. It makes a mockery of the principle foundational to our Constitution and system of government that no man is above the law, relying on little more than its own misguided wisdom about the need for bold and unhesitating action by the president. The court gives former President Trump all the immunity he asked for and more. I disagree with that in that it doesn't give him all the immunity he asked for, because he wanted immunity for everything and he doesn't get immunity for everything. And they specifically said that he didn't get immunity for a specific thing, but still, it gives him more immunity than he should have. The indictment paints a stark portrait of the president, desperate to stay in power. In the weeks leading up to January 6th, then President Trump allegedly spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud and the election had been actually won. Indictment, despite being notified repeatedly by his closest advisors that his claims were untrue. When dozens of courts swiftly rejected these claims, Trump allegedly pushed officials in certain states to ignore the popular vote, disenfranchise millions of voters, dismiss legitimate electors, and ultimately cause the ascertainment of and voting by illegitimate electors were in his favor. It is alleged that he went so far as to threaten one state election official with criminal prosecution if the official did not find 11,780 votes. Trump needed to change the election result in that state. When the state officials repeatedly declined to act outside their legal authority and alter the state election processes, Trump and his co-conspirators purportedly developed a plan to disrupt and displace the legitimate election certification process by organizing fraudulent slates of electors, blah, blah, blah. At the state of the certification proceeding near, Trump allegedly also sought to use the power and authority of the Justice Department to bolster his knowingly false claims of election fraud by initiating sham election crime investigations and sending official letters falsely claiming that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have been impacted the election outcome while falsely presenting fraudulent electors. When the department refused to do so, Trump turned to the vice president. Initially, he sought to persuade the VP to use his ceremonial role to fraudulently alter the election results. When persuasion failed, he attempted to use a crowd of supporters that he had gathered in Washington, D.C. to pressure then Vice President to fraudulently alter the election. Speaking to the crowd on January 6th, Trump falsely claimed that based on the fraud, Vice President could alter the outcome of the election results. When the crowd then violently attacked the Capitol and halted the proceeding, delayed in blah, blah, blah. Trump allegedly delayed in taking any step to rein in the chaos until he had unleashed. Instead, in a last desperate ploy to hold on to power, he allegedly attempted to exploit the violence and chaos in the Capitol by pressuring lawmakers to delay the certification and ultimately declare him the winner. That is the backdrop against the case comes to the court. The court now confronts the question whether or not, which has never had to answer in the nation's history, whether a former president enjoys immunity from federal criminal prosecution. Now, here's something for Chad, and for anybody else who might be a MAGA person or just somebody who's thinking of voting for Trump. Do we really want to have somebody as president who is just under indictment? Like, who the fact that he's, of all of the presidents that we've had, that he's the first to be indicted on crimes, shouldn't that in and of itself make you take pause and be like, you know what? Maybe there's another guy that's better. Maybe there's somebody else out there who would be somebody that we should look into supporting or whatever. But no, because you have so many people who are in the MAGA cult. The Republican Party is deathly afraid to go against them because they know without them, they lose. And they know that if they go against Trump, then Trump and the MAGA cult leaves, maybe forms another party, and then everything is in disarray. The Republican Party is over. Right? But still, for the individual Trump voter, Trump clearly did all of these things. Trump's not denying that he tried to convince the people in Georgia to change the vote. He's not denying that he tried to have people, send those electors. He's not denying that he tried to convince Pence to change the outcome of what his ceremonial duties would have been. He's just saying he should be immune from all of it. It's like he's doing the opposite of Shaggy. It wasn't me. He wasn't saying it wasn't me. He was saying immunity. The argument that he should be able to do it because he's immune, in and of itself, should be enough to make you take pause and be like, you know what? Trying to argue that you should be that you are doing it, you're immune, as justification for what you did, in and of itself should be problematic. What other things is Trump going to try and claim immunity for in the next term? Can you trust that it's going to be anything better? Or do you, or is there anything in your mind that says, you know what, maybe he might use this newfound power or new agreed to power that the Supreme Court has laid out to do things that are even worse? Hello, Wundermom. I think Aaron's probably there. It's probably you, me, and Aaron over in Twitch. Surrender Monkey. If I was Russian and this happened, it would certainly make me believe America was corrupt and stupid as the state propaganda says it is. We don't sleep with bedroom doors closed in the house. Carrie wife's rules, as well as HVAC reasons. Interesting. I don't know why that. Let's see. Why did that come up? Of course, we also don't sleep with the doors closed, because if our door was closed, the cats would just constantly scratch at the door to try and get in. So my wife loves leaving one light on the house, and at night it shines my eyes in bed. And see, that's the thing. I mean, we turn the hallway lights off on purpose just to make sure that it's dark. Nothing will be in my eyes, but we do keep the door open. So Bannon shakes delirium tremens tonight. What? Give me 1 billion Donalds and I'll relax laws that oil production hampers you with. See, Ichabod Deer, I always thought we had a government in place that would prevent anyone like Trump from getting absolute power regardless of the people's will. It's sad we do not. Well, it's because Donald Trump named the Supreme Court. He got to name 3 people to the court. Because of that, we now have a court that's beholden to Trump. I mean, Roberts and Alito and Trump weren't his, but the other 3 were. And Roberts wrote this opinion. And why did Roberts write this opinion? Because it wasn't going against anything that was an existing rule. So he felt fine, bending over for Trump in this particular case. And of course, he'll now continue to back up this flawed legal theory because he of the 5 his other Supreme Court conservative activists, he is the most likely to follow stare decisis. And now this is stare decisis. Now this is official precedent. He'll back this one up till the day he dies. Yes, Jolie, thank you for sharing the links. Appreciate you. Chad, I could give a shit less about crimes. I care more about business regulations and my bank account, both of which are better. Well, I mean, my bank account is better under Biden. So was it causation or correlation that your bank account was better under Trump? Like, I lost my job several times under Trump. I had to work rideshare for a while under Trump. Under Biden, I now have the best paying job I've ever gotten. So, would you say that it's not Biden that gave me the job? I mean, then I would argue it's not Trump that gave you the job. Correlation, causation. But here's my other thing: is that a lot of things that separate, like myself and others like me, with people who might be more willing to vote for Republicans, is that when I cast a ballot, it's not just for me. Like, if Donald Trump, ignoring my Jewishness for a second, which the world loves to do. Again, and I've said this before as well, if Donald Trump wins, I'll probably be okay. I won't be happy about it, but I will probably be okay. But there are a whole bunch of people who won't be okay. And so when I cast a ballot, my ballot is cast for the most oppressed, the most marginalized people out there. How do I make sure that they're not harmed? I look at the two only options that we have right now that can win. It's either Biden or Trump. No one else has a chance of winning. If that ever changes, I'll change my argument. But right now, it's Trump or it's Biden. Of those two options, less harm is done to marginalized and oppressed people under a Democratic administration. More harm will be done to marginalized and oppressed people by a Trump administration. So I can't support a Trump presidency for that specific reason. Now, I mean, you are free to I guess, vote in the way that you want to vote. And if you're only going to vote in the way that affects you, then it's fine. But I would just urge you to consider that maybe other people and the impacts of other people and what might happen to other people is a good way to go. It's a good thing to consider when considering how to cast a vote. Chad, the tax rate. Well, the tax rate, unless you're in the upper tax bracket, like the way upper tax bracket, the tax rate that Donald Trump set is set to expire for us peons. The upper echelon people, those tax cuts were made permanent. The business tax cuts were made permanent by Trump. But us peons, ours expire next year, thanks to Trump not making a good deal. You got there too, and they're ending soon. But the thing is that Biden is not going. Biden has already said that he doesn't want to see taxes raised for anybody making less than $400,000 a year. So Biden will work and pass a tax plan, as long as you give him the Congress to do so, that will probably maintain and make your tax code even better, unless you happen to be above $400,000 a year. So, yeah, this is what Republicans often do as well, especially Trump. They'll deficit spend and then blame the Democrats. They'll spend. They'll cut all the taxes. They'll claim that by cutting the taxes and the Laffer curve exists and you'll be able to raise revenue by cutting taxes. In reality, they just cut revenues and cut taxes and then paid off their campaign contributors. And I'd much rather tax and spend than cut and spend. Chris has 2 daughters with Biden. And if you have, and you shouldn't have to be like if you have mothers, sisters, daughters, whatever. You should be able to be like, I don't know anybody who's a woman close in my life and still want to support women's rights. I don't know, support body autonomy. Your daughters should have the right to determine their own body autonomy. And under a Trump administration, it's going to get worse and worse. Donald Trump once said that if somebody has to get an abortion, that the goes and gets an abortion, that the person who is pregnant should also be able to be charged with the crime. He's not just for charging those the doctors. He wants to charge the patients as well. And you might say, well, my kid might never actually get one or whatever, but you never know. I have a friend from way back in the day who, when she was a virgin, told me she would never get an abortion, ever, ever, ever. When she got an abortion, I think the first person she had sex with, she got pregnant. She had an abortion. She felt bad because she was mean to me, or she felt that she was mean to me about her stance on abortion and how could I be pro-choice. Well, I'm pro-choice because I think every person's situation is different and you need to be able to make the decision that's best for you and your body. So, and see, Chad, local elections, I think, have more of, are more likely to have more of an impact on day-to-day operations of yourself. But federal operations, federal elections, especially the presidency, have the ability to have the overreaching and broad effect. And the other thing is that if your local governments get froggy and start doing things that are not cool, I want somebody in office at the federal level who's going to go after those states. I don't want somebody who's going to make the fake states' rights argument. Because there's no such thing as states' rights. States have powers. People have rights. I don't want people who are going to make the argument that states should have the authority to do whatever it is they want to do. No, if states are encroaching on my individual rights, the federal government does have the authority to come in and crack down on it, and they should. I want somebody in office who's going to support that. I don't want somebody who's going to just only look at the federal government for what they can get for themselves, i.e. turning government upside down and shaking the count so the coins come out so he can get all the money for himself. But using it to, fearmonger, go after, the illegals, as he'll say, or whatever, the undocumented migrants. I want somebody that's going to actually work to protect the individuals, not somebody that's going to work to protect his, freedom, because if he doesn't win, he's afraid he's going to go to prison for a long ass time. Ichabod Deer, Trump is not a good businessman. He's a money launderer. I kind of made that point earlier, that Trump, I'm not saying that Trump's bankruptcies are failures of him being a failed business person, which a lot of people will try and make that argument. I don't believe that his bankruptcies make him a failed business person. I think he uses bankruptcies to enrich himself. And he's a scam artist. By using bankruptcies to enrich himself, he's a scam artist. Chad, think about it though. If you did care for the other people on all sides, then, how can you turn a blind eye to the comments about there being good people on both sides of Charlottesville, when the people on the pro-monument side on Charlottesville were marching right alongside Nazis? And if you march next to a Nazi, you're not a good person. I would say I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. You're not a good person if you march next to Nazis. And Chad, it's not easy for people just to go to a different state, especially in circumstances that we're seeing dealing with, like in Texas and Ohio. Well, in Ohio now that it's legal, but before we talked about the woman that was arrested because she miscarried in her own toilet because they wouldn't treat her in the hospital because she still technically had a heartbeat going on, despite the fact that all the amniotic fluid was leaking out. You had, the situation of several patients in Texas who could not get their procedures done because Texas was trying to block it because they said the abortion was not at the point where the law covered it at this point because the threat of death had to be imminent or whatever. And even though the doctor said, if you allow this to go further, it's going to be imminent. But they couldn't act now and prevent the risk of bodily harm to the patient, or maybe make it so that the patient wouldn't be able to further, at some point in the future, try and get pregnant again because of the damage done to the uterus by this miscarrying pregnancy. But if there was one of the arguments made to the state of Texas by one of the women bringing the suit was that you can't necessarily risk the trip, because what if you're in the process of having a miscarriage and in the trip from point A to point B you go septic? Then you can't do anything because you're on a plane, or maybe you're in a car that's far away from any nearby hospital. And then who's to say that hospital will even treat the condition at that point too? Because they might be like, well, we can't perform the abortion because it's against our state laws and blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, the person goes septic and dies because of the doctors not willing to risk their lives and livelihoods over a legal question that has not been adequately answered properly because these laws are written terribly. That's what we get when we do these ridiculous abortion bans. Now, I'm for more legal abortion than what that argument is advocating for. But if a person can't even save their own life or can't protect their own health from a pregnancy, like the Idaho thing. If in Idaho, they allowed the abortions to continue in Idaho whilst they're going through the whole process. But in Idaho, you have a difference between EMTALA and the Idaho law. EMTALA says, hey, you have to perform an abortion if you have an issue that's going to cause the patient to lose, to be infertile. If the condition of the pregnancy would be like, you're going to be infertile if this pregnancy continues. And Idaho says, no, our law says we can't. As of right now, you can still have the abortion in Idaho because of the Supreme Court, I guess, undoing the stay or whatever. But at the end of the day, you still have that disagreement between the parties in saying that, the state of Idaho says you shouldn't be able to have an abortion if it's just your health that's in danger. It's only your life that's in danger that can cause you to get an abortion. And it has to be known, that it has to be agreed to. And then the doctor still has to be like, well, is this really a condition that's where I can say firmly that the patient's life is firmly at risk, or do I have to, like there's a whole issue about ectopic pregnancies and how whether or not you could treat it or not. So this is the point here. Well, Republicans will often talk about individual liberty and the right for you to, have to be free from government intrusion, but it's all lip service, because right now you have Republicans passing laws that allow people or force people into situations where they might die or they might lose their ability to get pregnant in the future because of a bad pregnancy now. All because of a misguided view of morality that ignores any science whatsoever. If you're liberal on abortion and doesn't drive your vote, then you're not that liberal on abortion. If you personally believe that somebody should have the right to choose, but yet are going to vote for people who don't, that's what matters. Like, on the other side of the coin, like my mother-in-law passed away in April. Personally, she was pro-life. Personally, she didn't want to, I would have never gotten one. I don't believe in it. But she's like, I don't believe the government should be funding it either. Which means in reality, she was pro-choice. If you're voting for politicians that are going to put forward laws that are going to harm people, then you have to be seen as being responsible for electing those people into office. So, let's continue to chat about Sotomayor's. Majority makes 3 moves that in effect completely insulate presidents from criminal liability. First, the majority creates an absolute immunity for the president's exercise of core constitutional powers. This holding is unnecessary on the facts of the indictment, and the majority's attempt to apply it to the facts expands the concept of the core powers beyond any recognizable bounds. In any event, it's quickly eclipsed by the second move, which is to create an expansive immunity for all, quote, official acts, whether described as presumptive or absolute under the majority's rule. A president's use of any official power for any purpose, even the most corrupt, is immune from prosecution. This is just as bad as it sounds, and it is baseless. Finally, the majority declares that evidence concerning acts for which the president is immune can play no role in any criminal prosecution against him. That holding, which will prevent the government from using a president's official acts to prove knowledge or intent in prosecuting private offenses, is nonsensical. I agree on that. Argument by argument, the majority invents immunity through brute force because they are an activist conservative court. Under scrutiny, its arguments crumble. To start, the majority's broad official acts immunity is inconsistent with text, history, and established understanding of the president's role. Moreover, it's deeply wrong, even on its own fundamentalist terms. Next, the majority's core immunity is both unnecessary and misguided. Finally, the majority will have disastrous consequences for the presidency and our democracy. The main takeaway of today's decision is that all of a president's official acts defined without regard to motive or intent are entitled to immunity that is at least presumptive and quite possibly absolute. Whether the president wields the enormous power of his office, the majority says the criminal law cannot touch him. The official acts immunity has no firm grounding in constitutional text, history, or precedent. Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health. I like that she's using Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health to go against the majority. Indeed, those standard grounds for constitutional decision-making point in the opposite direction. No matter how you look at it, the majority's official acts immunity is utterly indefensible. The majority calls for a careful assessment of the scope of presidential power under the Constitution. For the majority, a careful assessment does not involve the Constitution's text. I would start there. The Constitution text contains no provision for immunity for criminal prosecution for former presidents. Of course, the silence of the Constitution on the score is not dispositive, insofar as the majority rails against the notion that a specific textual basis is required. It is attacking an argument that has not been made here. The omission in the text of the Constitution is worth noting, however, for at least 3 reasons. First, the framers clearly knew how to provide for immunity from prosecution. They did provide a narrow immunity for legislators in the speech or debate clause. See Article 1, Clause 1, senators and representatives shall be in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of the representative houses and in going to and returning from same, and for any speech or debate in either house they shall not be questioned in any other place. They did not extend the same or similar immunity to presidents. Second, some state constitutions at the time of the framing specifically provided express criminal immunities to sitting governors. If the framers had wanted to create some sort of constitutional privilege to shield the president from criminal indictment, they could have done so. Third, insofar as the Constitution does speak to this question, it actually contemplates some form of criminal liability for former presidents. The majority correctly rejects Trump's argument that a former president cannot be prosecuted unless he has been impeached by the House and is convicted by the Senate for the same content. The majority ignores, however, that impeachment judgment clause cuts against its own position. That clause presumes the availability of criminal process as a backstop by establishing that an official impeached and convicted by Senate shall nevertheless be liable for subject to the indictment, trial, and judgment and punishment according to law. That clause clearly contemplates that a former president may be subject to criminal prosecution for the same conduct that resulted or could have resulted in an impeachment judgment, including conduct such as bribery, which implicates official acts by definition. Aware of its lack of textual support, the majority points out the court has recognized presidential immunities and privileges rooted in the constitutional tradition of the separation of powers. That's true as far as it goes. Nothing in our history, however, supports the majority's entirely novel immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. Historical evidence that exists on presidential immunity from criminal prosecution cuts decisively against it. For instance, Alexander Hamilton wrote that former presidents would be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law. Federalist number 69, nice. For Hamilton, that was an important distinction between the King of Great Britain, who was sacred and inviolable, and the President of the United States, who would be amenable to personal punishment and disgrace. In contrast to the King, presidents should be subject to personal responsibility for his actions, standing upon no ground other than a governor of New York, and upon worse ground than governors of Maryland and Delaware, whose state constitutions gave some immunity. At the Constitutional Convention, James Madison, who was aware that some state constitutions provided governors immunity, proposed that the convention consider what privileges ought to be allowed to the executive. Records of the Federal Convention, there is no record of any such discussion. Delegate Charles Pinckney later explained that the convention which formed the Constitution well knew that no subject had been more abused than privilege, and so it determined to limit privilege to what was necessary and no more. No privilege was intended for the executive. I guess the conservatives like to pick and choose what parts of the Federalist Papers they like to read, don't they? Historical evidence reinforces that from the very beginning, the presumption that this nation has always been that no man is free to flout the criminal law. The majority fails to recognize or grapple with the lack of historical evidence for its new immunity. With nothing on its side on the ledger, the most majority can do is claim that this historical evidence is a wash. It claims that the court previously had described its relevant historical evidence as fragmentary and not worthy of consideration, blah, blah, blah. Let's just kind of scoot down here. Because basically she's just owning. In sum, the majority today endorses an expansive vision for presidential immunity that was never recognized by the founders, any sitting president, the executive branch, or even President Trump's lawyers until now. Settled understandings of the Constitution are of little use to the majority in this case, so it ignores them. Nice. Setting aside the evidence, the majority announces that former presidents are absolutely or at least presumptively immune from criminal prosecution for all of their official acts. The majority purports to keep us in suspense as to whether this immunity is absolute or presumptive, but it quickly gives up the game. It explains that at a minimum, the president must be immune from prosecution for an official act unless the government can show that applying a criminal prohibition to that act would pose no dangers of intrusion of the authority and functions of the executive branch. Of course, there's nothing to be said. There's nothing damaging to the executive to hold him responsible for things that he has no responsibility for, like elections. No dangers, not at all. It's hard to imagine a criminal prosecution for a president's official acts that would pose no dangers of intrusion on the presidential authority in the majority's eyes, nor should that be the standard. Surely some intrusions on the executive may be justified by an overriding need to promote objectives within the constitutional authority of Congress. Other intrusions may be justified by the primary constitutional duty of the judicial branch to do justice in criminal prosecutions. Maybe some future opinion of this court will decide that presumptive immunity is sufficient and replace the majority's ironclad presumption with one makes the difference between presumptive and absolute immunity meaningful. Today's court, however, has replaced the presumption of equality of the law with a presumption that the president is above the law. Quick on the heels of announcing its astonishingly broad official acts immunity, the majority assures us that the former president can be prosecuted for unofficial acts. Of course he can. No one has questioned the ability to prosecute a former president for unofficial, otherwise known as private acts. Even Trump did not claim immunity for such acts, and as the majority, I think he did. As the majority acknowledges such immunity, he said he could stand in the middle of Times Square and probably still get whatever. This unremarkable proposition is no real limit on today's decision. It does not hide the majority's embrace of the most far-reaching view of presidential immunity on offer. How does the majority get to its rule? With text, history, and established understanding all weighing against it, the majority claims just one arrow in the quiver, the balancing test in Nixon versus Fitzgerald. Yet even that test cuts against it. The majority concludes that official acts immunity is required to safeguard the independence and effective functioning of the executive branch by rejecting that branch's own protestations that such immunity is not at all required and would in fact be harmful. In doing so, it decontextualizes Fitzgerald's language. In Fitzgerald, the plaintiff, Ernest Fitzgerald, sued then former President Nixon of money damages. He claimed that while in office, Nixon had been involved in unlawfully firing from a government job. The question for the court was whether a former president had immunity from such a civil suit. The court explained that it was settled law that the separation of powers doctrine does not bar every instance of jurisdiction over the president. To determine whether a particular type of suit was allowable, the court must balance the constitutional weight of the interest to be served against the dangers of intrusion of authority. The court explained that when judicial action is needed to serve a broad public interest, when the court acts not in derogation of the separation of powers but to maintain the proper balance, to vindicate the public interest on an ongoing criminal prosecution, the exercise of jurisdiction has been held warranted. Of course, the court ignores that, yada, yada, yada. Let's just kind of scroll down a bit more. Go down to her conclusion. Long-ass dissent. Scroll, 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 scroll. Wow. Damn. The majority's simple-minded fixation on the president's need for boldness and dispatch ignores the countervailing need for accountability and restraint. The framers were not so single-minded in the Federalist Papers after endeavoring to show that the executive designed by the Constitution combines all the requisites to energy. Alexander Hamilton asked a separate, equally important question: does it also combine the requisites to safety? In a Republican sense, a due dependence on the people, a due responsibility. Federalist 77, the answer was then yes, based on part of the president's vulnerability to prosecution in the common course of law. The answer after today is no. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from a criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for democracy, I dissent. And then you have Jackson dissenting. Justice Sotomayor has thoroughly addressed the court's flawed reasoning and conclusion as a matter of history, tradition, law, and logic. I agree with every word of her powerful dissent. I write separately to explain as succinctly as I can the theoretical nuts and bolts of what exactly the majority has done today to alter the paradigm of accountability for presidents of the United States. I address what that paradigm shift means for our nation moving forward. To fully appreciate the profound change the majority has wrought, one must first acknowledge what it means to have immunity from criminal prosecution. Put simply, immunity is exemption from the duties and liabilities imposed by law. According to Black's Law's Dictionary, in its purest form, the concept of immunity boils down to the king can do no wrong, a notion that was firmly rejected at the birth of our republic. That is something that someone is immune from criminal prosecution is to say that, like a king, he is not under the coercive power of the law, which will not suppose him capable of committing a folly, much less a crime. Thus, being immune is not like having a defense under the law. Rather, it means that the law does not apply to the immunized person in the first place. Conferring immunity, therefore, creates a privileged class free from liability for wrongs inflicted or injuries threatened. It is indisputable that immunity from liability for wrongdoing is the exception rather than the rule in the American criminal justice system. There is entirely unsurprising, for the very idea of immunity stands in tension with foundational principles of our system of government. It's a core tenet in our democracy that the people are sovereign and the rule of law is our first and final security. From their own experience and their deep reading of history, the founders knew that law alone serves a society from being rent by internecine strife or ruled by mere brute power, however disguised. A corollary to that principle sets the terms in the case. No man in this country is so high that he is above the law. No officer or of the law shall set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to it. United States versus Lee. We have long lived with the collective understanding, decency, security, and liberty alike. Demand that government officials shall be subjected to the same rules of conduct that are commands of the citizen. For in government of laws, the existence of the government will be imperiled if it fails to observe the law scrupulously. These foundational presuppositions are reflected in a procedural paradigm of rules and accountability that operates in the realm of criminal law, what I would call individual accountability model. The basic contours of the model are familiar because they manifest in every criminal case. Criminal law starts with an act of the legislature, which holds the power to define a crime and ordain its punishment. Criminal statutes are laws generally applicable that express the assent of the people's representatives that certain conduct is off limits. When the federal government believes that someone has run afoul of criminal statutes and determines its exercise to prosecutorial discretion to pursue punishment, it forms a grand jury. Then the government marshals evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Blah, 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 blah. For his part, the defendant stands accused but is presumed innocent until the conviction upon trial or guilty plea. Notably, criminal defendants have various constitutionally protected rights during the criminal liability process, including the rights to a speedy and public trial, the right to have a jury decide guilt or innocence, the right to assistance of counsel, the right to confront the witnesses against him. The defendant also at his disposal many means to defend himself against a criminal charge. He can seek to hold government to its burden of proof at trial, and even before trial, in a motion to dismiss the indictment, he might make any number of legal arguments. He can assert, for example, that the government's charging document does not give adequate notice of the charge against him, or that the law has been accused of violating. He was unconstitutionally vague. He might further claim that the law is unconstitutional as applied to his conduct. He might maintain his conduct even if proved does not violate the law at issue. The defendant may also raise an attempt to prove affirmative defenses such as excuse conduct that would otherwise be punishable. Generally speaking, affirmative defenses are determinations often adopted by legislation that certain conduct otherwise punishable by law is justified. This might be the case, for example, when the legislator determines that under specified circumstances, the societal harm particular conduct causes is outweighed by the need to avoid an even greater harm. Importantly, a defense is not an immunity, even though a defense can likewise result in a person charged with a crime avoiding liability for his criminal conduct. Consistent with our foundational norms, the individual accountability model adheres to the presumption that the law applies to all and everyone must follow it, yet the model makes allowances for recognized offenses. One such defense is the special privilege that government officials sometimes invoke when carrying out their official duties. All of this to say that our government has long functioned under an accountability paradigm in which no one is above the law, an accused person is innocent until proven guilty, and criminal defendants may raise defenses, both legal and factual, tailored to their particular circumstances, whether they be government officials or ordinary citizens. For over 2 centuries, the nation has survived with these principles intact. With that understanding of how our system works, it becomes much easier to see that the majority's ruling in this case breaks new and dangerous ground, departing from traditional model of individual accountability. The majority has concocted something entirely different, a presidential accountability model that creates immunity and exception from criminal law, applicable only to the most powerful official in our government. How does this new model work? An initial problem is the lack of clarity regarding this new model entails. Yada, yada, yada. First, with respect to criminal conduct related to a president's core constitutional powers, those subjects within his conclusive or reclusive constitutional authority, the president is entitled to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. Second, expanding outward from its core regarding all other acts, the president is entitled to at least a presumptive immunity for criminal prosecution. Third, if criminal conduct at issue compromises unofficial acts, there's no immunity. Applying the majority's new presidential accountability model, thus, it seems to involve bearing down on indictment allegations and making a series of determinations about the nature of the conduct at issue. From the structure of the paradigm, it seems that the first decision point is whether or not the alleged criminal conduct involves one of the president's core powers. If so, then the president is absolutely immune. If not, then one must proceed to consider whether it's an official or unofficial act. If the crime is an official act, the president is presumptively immune from criminal prosecution and punishment, but even then, immunity still hinges on whether there's a legal or factual basis for concluding that the presumption of immunity has been rebutted. Alternatively, if the charged conduct is unofficial, the courts must make without... that's something that the courts must make without considering the president's motivations. The president is not immune, which is bullshit, because how do you determine if something is unofficial if you can't discern the president's motivations? The majority's multi-layered, multifaceted threshold passing of the character of a president's criminal conduct differs from the individual accountability model in several ways. I think we can all see those. I don't think we necessarily have to go into all that. She says Justice Barrett's version of presidential accountability works slightly differently. She would have us ask first whether the relevant criminal statute reaches the president's official's conduct. But again, what's at issue here is the statutes of generally applicability. They only reach the president's conduct to the extent that he chooses to engage in prohibited behavior. Pretty much. Let's just kind of scroll down a bit again. We don't have to go through every single word of this. Scroll. Let's get to the dots to get to the final point. Then we'll get to the points in the chat. Yeah. The majority of my colleagues seem to have put their trust in the court's ability to prevent presidents from becoming kings through case-by-case application of the indeterminate standards of their new presidential accountability paradigm. I fear that they are wrong, but for all of our sakes, I hope they are right in the meantime, because the risks and power the court has now assumed are intolerable, unwarranted, and plainly antithetical to bedrock constitutional norms. I dissent. So, we dissent right along with you. Justice Sotomayor. So let's scroll backwards the thing. Hunger Reader TK, welcome to the chat. Remember, Obama did not have any luck with the Republicans either. They did not want to work with him as well. That's true. The Republicans did not want to work with Obama. In fact, specifically when before Obama was sworn in the time between his election being made official, like their January 6th and January 20th of that year, of 2009, the Republicans, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, they got together and basically was like, we're going to do everything we can to stop whatever it is Obama wants to do. Period. So they started from everything's a no-go. Maybe they'll make slight exceptions, but everything's a no-go for them. So yes. Oh yes, the Trump excuse for not answering the question. I don't believe you're. Blah, 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 blah. Let's scroll backwards. I see you waiting on hold, Khalil. Hold on a second. We'll get to you in a. Oh no, let's get to Khalil now, just in case the show ends before. What's up, Khalil? What's going on?
I'm doing okay. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I don't know how long you were on hold, but I'm just wanted to get to you before the Blog Talk Radio time is up. What's up?
Did I tell you about my camping trip?
You did, yes.
Oh yeah. Also, I found out that in West Virginia and Virginia, Hinton's named after the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Hinton, Virginia.
Right.
And it had to do with like Civil War times, slavery times. So basically, both West Virginia and Virginia is named after a guy that's historical.
Yeah, I mean most are. The odd thing is that West Virginia basically was like, the reason West Virginia was created was because they didn't want to be part of Virginia in the Confederacy. That's how we got West Virginia, which is weird because nowadays West Virginia is more conservative and more quote Southern than Virginia is today, at least for the vast majority part, because a lot of the population of Virginia is settled around D.C., so that's where you get lots of your liberal votes in, not like the areas up 81 that it is a hell to drive, but much more sparsely populated. So.
Yeah, and the weird thing I was telling you, I don't know if I told you about it, but basically when they had the van there and they were camping with us,
right?
They parked it backwards, then they turned it around, then they parked it backwards again, and I was telling you that they both had folding pocket knives on them, the tactical ones,
right,
in the park, and they carried it across state lines into West Virginia Park, and basically what they left the van there. It was like a Transit Ford or BMW van, the newer ones. They left it there. It didn't have a window or anything in it. And they, when they left, that's when they took the van back.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I found the only people who can carry those folding pocket knives in the park are police officers.
Huh. Interesting. Well, a lot of times you have rules where only officers contain certain weapons. I mean, some of them make sense. Some of them maybe not. I don't know why a folding knife would make that big of a difference. But, sometimes rules are silly. But,
Sometimes they are.
But sometimes they're not. So, but that's one of the whole things, like when Donald Trump talks about how he got rid of regulations. I'm like, so What regulations did you get rid of? That's what I want to know, because some regulations might very well be silly. Some regulations might very well be important. And now some regulations might be on the chopping block because of the Chevron ruling from last week. So that might get us all screwed. So anyway, I did want to make sure to get to you before the show ends, but the show ends relatively soon. I might try and stretch out the Blog Talk Radio in time beforehand, but I did want to say hey and thank you for calling in. Appreciate you and hope to talk to you again earlier in the show next time. Have a good one, Khalil.
You too.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
All right. Let's see. We were talking about tariffs in the chat a little earlier. Tariffs. One of the problems with tariffs is, like, Trump was making the argument during the debate about tariffs that if that the companies that are that are trying to ship the items into this country that are going to be tariffed are those companies are going to have to pay the amount of the tariff. I'm like, that's not necessarily true. It depends on the price elasticity of demand. If the demand of the good is inelastic, i.e. that the demand doesn't change
90
based
seconds.
off of increases of the price of the good or not, then they very well might pass on the costs to the consumer. Whereas if the price is elastic, where they have lots of alternatives or whatever, where maybe there are American alternatives to the imported product, in those particular cases, then you might see the companies who are importing those products, you might see those prices not shift, and you might see those companies having to pay the money out of their bottom line instead of having to pay it out of their overall, instead of them paying it, instead of having it come at the cost of the increased price for the consumers. So it's not a good argument that Trump makes to say that the other companies are going to pay the tariffs. No, the consumer pays the tariffs ultimately. It's just a matter of, will the consumer pay an increased cost because of the tariff, and that depends on the price elasticity of demand of the particular good in question. So, let's see, blah, 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 blah.
10 seconds.
Well, it says 10 seconds, but we're not ending in 10 seconds, obviously. So, although there is a warning, the Twitch stream will probably go off immediately, and then the Twitch stream will go off immediately, and then the maybe I'm gonna try and make it so the Liberal Dan radio stream goes off afterwards, because Twitch does not like the Nimbus song. It claims some sort of copyright things, and it mutes it, and it puts my videos into unvisible or whatever. So I have to be more careful with that. I might have to find a new opening and closing song if I want to do for both. My problem is that I can't start the stream without starting on Twitch. That's why I started a little bit later today. Let's see. So Chris, it's the fault of both parties not bringing manufacturing home, but going cheap with overseas later. Yeah, there's a lot of that, especially when you had like NAFTA and CAFTA and everything like that. Now, Biden did try to bring stuff back to normalcy, but Republicans won't work with them, and if the Republicans won't work with them, then you can't do anything, which is another thing. We had a pandemic, and Donald Trump was president, but the Democrats controlled the House. To show you the difference between the two parties, the Democrats worked with Trump to get things done for the good of the American people as best as they could. They had to deal with Trump's bumbling idiocies, but they weren't going to be like, we're not going to do anything for Trump because we don't want to help Trump have anything good attached to his name. The Democrats were like, we're going to pass these things, and we're going to negotiate and try to get these things done, and we're going to try and help the American people as much as we can, in spite of the fact that Donald Trump is president. Under Biden, the Republicans are completely different. They're like, we're going to do things that even we want to do, because it's more important to stop Biden than it is to help the country. That's the answer to that's why the two parties are significantly different. The Democrats will work with Republicans when the Republicans are in power, but the Republicans won't work with Democrats while the Democrats are in power. And the weird, convoluted argument that will be made by many MAGA folks will be like, well, then clearly we need to vote for Republicans in office just because the Democrats are going to work with them, so therefore it becomes a much more stable government. No. The argument is you need to reject the Republicans who do that and let the Democrats run the government, because the Democrats are going to do the things that are needed for the American people, not for the big corporate shills and the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation religious a-holes. So let's see, mods are having to delete some stuff. Y'all remember, attack the person's argument, not the person in and of themselves. See, Chuck or John, tariffs-like regulations can sometimes be good, sometimes be bad. It depends on when and how they're used, but Trump is too stupid to know the difference, so it just blankly applies them. Amen, preach, my brother. See, before Trump's tariffs hadn't been used for well over half a century. They were devastating during the early 1900s in the U.S. economy. And there's that too. A lot of times I think there was changes of the tariffs or whatever. Chuck or John, I've never seen a good reason to vote for a Republican. Well, there's that, you know. There was one particular city, there was a city election in where I used to live, in the city of Kenner, where the Democrat was never going to win. Not ever. And there were 3 Republicans that were vying for the top spot, and there was one Republican who was the least worst of the 3. And so that's why and you had to make sure that the runoff was not between the 2 idiots that were fighting against him. You needed this other guy in there to be in the runoff to make sure that it wasn't between dummy A and dummy B for like the 3rd time in a row or whatever, because there was these political factions going on. And so that's why I vote. That's probably the one time I voted for a Republican ever. It was because, again, there was no chance the Democrat was going to win. So I was just like, look, vote for the least harm. As Hal says, if you have the choice between multiple evils, always choose less evil. So, anyway, before Blog Talk shuts me off and I can't play the outro, I will go ahead and play the outro. Tomorrow I'll be live, twitch.tv/nerdydan.com for the gaming stream. Feel free to join me then. We'll talk about like the other game or whatever. I still have about a week left for the game that the sponsorship is. If you want to see more information of the game, look at the episode thread here at liberaldanradio.com. You can get the link. Downloading installing that software in and of itself gets me $4. If you want to help me get $4, 20 people doing that, awesome. Otherwise, play the game. It helps me get more money. Whatever. Support the show, subscribe, like, comment, share, etc. All the other good things to do. We've talked about it earlier in the show. I'll be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central here on YouTube for more, and Twitch for more Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right. And let's see if this works.